A marriage colder than death. But she refused to freeze. They called it a wedding. Eliza Whitmore called it a funeral. Standing at the altar in borrowed silk, she married a man whose eyes held nothing but winter. Victor Blackthorne, the Duke who'd never wanted a wife. The bargain was simple, her family's survival for her lifetime of silence. But on their wedding night, when he looked at her like she was air, something inside her turned to steel instead of breaking. This is the story of how a woman they tried to bury became the storm that shook an empire. Stay until the end, like if you're watching from your city. Comment where you're from. The rain fell like judgment on the morning Eliza Whitmore became a duchess. It hammered against the carriage windows as she rode toward Thornwick Hall, each drop a reminder that she was traveling not toward a new life, but toward a kind of death. Her mother's trembling hands had fastened the pearl buttons at her neck 3 hours earlier, whispering reassurances that felt like lies. Her father hadn't even come to say goodbye. Too ashamed, perhaps, or too relieved that his gambling debts would finally be cleared by selling his daughter to a title. "You'll want for nothing," her mother had said, not meeting her eyes. "Except warmth. Except choice. Except love." The Whitmore estate was drowning in debt, suffocating under the weight of her father's spectacular failures at the card tables and his catastrophic investments in ventures that collapsed like houses of paper. For months, creditors had circled like vultures. Servants disappeared in the night, unpaid. The silver vanished piece by piece. Her younger sisters grew thin on rationed meals while their father drank himself into oblivion. And then Victor Blackthorne's offer arrived. Not a courtship, an acquisition. A marriage contract drafted by lawyers, not lovers. He needed a wife to satisfy society's expectations and produce an heir. She needed to save her family from complete ruin. It was, everyone assured her, a perfectly reasonable arrangement. No one mentioned that reasonable arrangements could feel like drowning. The carriage jerked to a halt, and Eliza's breath caught. Through the rain-streaked glass, Thornwick Hall rose like a fortress against the bruised sky, all gray stone and sharp towers, unwelcoming and vast. No lights burned in welcome. No staff lined the steps to greet the new duchess. Just stone and silence and the relentless rain. The driver opened her door without ceremony. She stepped out into the downpour, her traveling dress immediately soaked, her kid leather boots sinking into mud that the estate's staff apparently hadn't bothered to clear. The front doors finally opened and a woman emerged, tall, thin, dressed in severe black that matched the storm. Her face was all sharp angles and sharper judgment. "Mrs. Hillcrest," the woman announced without preamble or warmth. "Housekeeper, you're late." "The rain delayed us," Eliza said, trying to keep her voice steady as water streamed down her face. "The Duke does not tolerate excuses. Your belongings will be brought to your chambers. Someone will show you where." Mrs. Hillcrest's eyes swept over Eliza's sodden appearance with obvious distaste. "The wedding is in 2 hours. Do try to make yourself presentable." She turned and disappeared back into the house, leaving Eliza standing in the rain. This is how it begins, Eliza thought, water dripping from her hair, mud on her dress, alone in the storm. This is the warmth I can expect. A younger maid finally appeared, eyes downcast, and led Eliza through corridors that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The walls were lined with portraits of grim-faced ancestors, all seeming to judge the muddy girl being rushed to her chambers. The house smelled of old stone and older money, cold, established, immovable. Her room was large and impersonal, decorated in shades of gray and pale blue that somehow made it feel even emptier. A wedding dress had been laid out on the bed, not the one she'd hoped to wear, the one her grandmother had worn, but a new one, clearly expensive, chosen without her input. Of course. Even this isn't mine. The maid helped her undress in silence, then disappeared, leaving Eliza alone with 2 hours to prepare for a wedding no one wanted and everyone expected. She stood at the window, watching the storm rage across the grounds. The gardens below were overgrown, choked with weeds. The greenhouse in the distance had broken panes. Everything looked neglected, abandoned, dying. Just like me, she thought, just another thing brought here to wither. But beneath the despair, something else stirred, something her mother had never understood, something her father's weakness had tried to crush. Not hope, exactly. something harder: refusal. If they expected her to simply fade into the wallpaper of this cold house, to become another silent portrait on these walls, they would be disappointed. The wedding was exactly as warm as Eliza expected, which is to say, it wasn't. The chapel at Thornwick was small, private, witnesses limited to the legally required minimum. Mrs. Hillcrest stood in the back with two other senior staff. A lawyer stood beside them, clutching the marriage contract like it was holy scripture. The vicar looked uncomfortable, rushing through vows that should have been sacred but felt like a business transaction. And Victor Blackthorne stood at the altar like a man attending his own execution. Eliza had seen him before, of course, once, briefly, when the marriage had been arranged, but that had been in her family's drawing room, surrounded by others, the meeting brief and formal. Now, seeing him properly for the first time, she understood why servants whispered about him with fear rather than admiration. He was tall, taller than she'd remembered, with the kind of rigid posture that suggested a man constantly at war with himself. His dark hair was ruthlessly controlled, his jaw carved from granite, his eyes the color of a winter sea. Handsome, yes, in the way a marble statue is handsome. Perfect, cold, utterly lifeless. He didn't look at her as she approached. The vows were perfunctory. Her voice shook only once when promising to honor and obey a man she didn't know. His voice was flat, emotionless, delivering his lines like a condemned man reading his sentence. When the vicar pronounced them married, Victor's jaw tightened visibly. He didn't kiss her, didn't even meet her eyes, just turned and walked back down the aisle, leaving her to follow like an afterthought. The wedding breakfast was even worse. They sat at opposite ends of a table long enough to seat 20, served food Eliza couldn't taste by servants who wouldn't meet her eyes. Victor ate mechanically, his attention on papers his secretary had apparently deemed important enough to intrude on his wedding day. "Your Grace," Eliza finally said, her voice echoing in the cavernous dining room, "might we discuss the arrangements for—" "Mrs. Hillcrest will handle all household matters," he interrupted without looking up. "Direct your questions to her." "I wasn't asking about household matters. I thought we might—" "I have work to attend to." He stood abruptly, tossing his napkin onto his barely touched plate. "You'll find your evenings are your own. I don't dine at home regularly." He was gone before she could form a response. Eliza sat alone at that enormous table, surrounded by servants who pretended not to see her humiliation and felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart, that she'd prepared to guard. Something deeper. Some last remnant of the girl who'd believed that maybe, possibly, this cold arrangement might thaw into something bearable. Mrs. Hillcrest appeared at her elbow. "Will your Grace require anything else?" "Your Grace." The title felt like a joke. "No," Eliza said quietly. "Thank you." She spent the rest of the afternoon exploring her prison. Thornwick Hall was massive, far larger than her family's modest estate. Room after room of expensive emptiness. Libraries full of books that looked unread. Drawing rooms that looked unused. Parlors that felt like museums. Everything perfectly maintained and perfectly dead. The servants she encountered disappeared around corners when they saw her coming. The few who couldn't escape offered stiff curtsies without warmth or welcome. In the portrait gallery, she found Victor's family history painted on canvas. Generations of Blackthorns, all with the same hard eyes and harder expressions. No softness anywhere. No joy. Just duty and pride and cold, relentless power. And at the end, a portrait that made her stop. A woman, young, beautiful, painted in a garden full of roses. Unlike every other portrait in the gallery, this one glowed with life. The woman's smile was genuine, her eyes bright, her whole being radiating warmth. "That's Lady Catherine." Eliza spun. A young woman stood in the doorway, early 20s, beautifully dressed, with Victor's dark hair and sharp features, but none of his coldness. Her eyes assessed Eliza with open curiosity. "The Duke's late wife?" Eliza asked, her stomach sinking. "His late mother," the woman corrected, moving closer. "She died when he was 12. I'm Isabel, Victor's sister." "And you're the new acquisition." The word stung because it was true. "I'm Eliza." "I know who you are. daughter of a ruined gambler, sold to clear his debts. Isabel's smile was sharp as glass. Don't look so wounded. It's not an insult, just facts. Victor needed a wife who'd produce an heir and not make demands. You needed money. It's almost romantic in its honesty. If you've come to make me feel worse about my situation, I've come to see if you'll last a month, Isabel interrupted. The last woman Victor nearly married fled after meeting him twice. She called him emotionally glacial and married a baron instead. Lost the title but kept her soul, she said. Eliza's hands clenched at her sides. I don't have the luxury of fleeing. No, Isabel agreed, studying her. You really don't. Your family would be destroyed, wouldn't they, if you left? Yes. Then you're trapped. How delightful. Isabel turned back to the portrait of Lady Catherine. She was different, you know. Before she died, this house was actually alive. Victor laughed then. Can you imagine? My cold, terrible brother actually laughed. What happened to her? Pneumonia. Sudden. Brutal. Father was traveling when it happened. By the time he returned, she was gone. Isabel's voice went flat. Father blamed Victor, said if the boy had been more vigilant, more responsible, she might have been saved. Victor was 12, but Father needed someone to blame, and Mother couldn't defend herself from the grave. That's monstrous. That's Thornwick, Isabel said. Welcome to the family, sister. Try not to wither too quickly. It's so tedious watching women fade here. She swept out, leaving Eliza alone with the painted smile of a dead woman who'd once made this house warm. Night fell like a blade. Eliza returned to her chambers to find them prepared for a wedding night that clearly wasn't going to happen. Someone had turned down the bed, left wine in glasses, lit candles that cast romantic shadows across the cold room. She waited, wearing the nightgown that had been laid out, trying not to feel humiliated by her own hope that maybe Victor would at least try to make this bearable. The clock struck 9, then 10, then 11. At midnight, the door finally opened. Victor stood in the doorway, still fully dressed, his face carved from stone. We should establish expectations, he said without preamble. Eliza stood, wrapping her robe tighter. I agree. This marriage is a contract, nothing more. He spoke like he was dictating terms to a business partner. You'll have your own chambers, your own schedule. I won't interfere with your days if you don't interfere with mine. And at night? His jaw tightened. When an heir is required, I'll inform you. Until then, your nights are your own. Something hot and furious rose in Eliza's chest. How generous. I'm not trying to be generous, I'm being clear. He moved into the room but kept his distance, like she might contaminate him. I didn't want this marriage. I don't want a wife. I want to be left alone to manage my estates and my responsibilities without the complication of... He gestured vaguely at her. This. This? Eliza's voice shook with rage. You mean me? Your wife? I mean the expectation that I should pretend to feel something I don't. For the first time, emotion cracked through his cold facade. Not warmth, but something darker. Anger. I won't lie to you. I won't pretend this is a love match. I won't play the devoted husband in public or private. That's not who I am. Then who are you? Someone who learned very young that love is a weakness that destroys everything it touches. He turned toward the door. You'll have everything you need. Money, security, status. Just don't expect warmth. Don't expect companionship. And don't expect me to become someone I'm not. Wait. He paused, not looking back. Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. You're right. This is a contract. So let me be equally clear about my expectations. I won't fade into the wallpaper of this house. I won't become another silent portrait in your gallery. And I won't apologize for existing just because my presence inconveniences you. Now he looked back, surprise flickering across his face. I didn't choose this either, Eliza continued, her hands shaking but her voice firm. But I'm here. And I'll make the best of it, with or without your cooperation. So if you want to hide in your work and pretend I don't exist, fine. But don't expect me to disappear just because you're uncomfortable with the fact that you had to marry a human being instead of a contract. Silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. You'll regret that, Spirit, Victor finally said, his voice low. This house breaks spirits. It broke my mother's. It broke my father's. It will break yours. Or maybe, Eliza said quietly, I'll break it first. Something flickered in his eyes. Shock maybe, or the ghost of respect. Then it was gone, the ice reforming. Good night, Your Grace, he said, and left. Eliza stood alone in the candlelight, trembling with rage and fear, and something that felt dangerously like determination. Let them all think I'll break, she thought, blowing out the candles one by one. Let them underestimate me. Let them ignore me. They'll learn. The first week was an education in loneliness. Victor disappeared into his work like a man drowning himself in paperwork. He left before dawn, returned after midnight, took his meals in his study. Eliza saw him exactly twice. Once in passing in the hallway, he nodded without speaking, and once through a window as he rode out across the estate. He didn't look up. Mrs. Hillcrest ran the household with military precision, making it clear that the new Duchess's opinions were neither required nor welcome. The menus are established, she said when Eliza tried to discuss the meals. His Grace prefers consistency. The servants' schedules are set, she said when Eliza tried to learn their names. Changes create confusion. The household accounts are managed, she said when Eliza asked to review the finances. His Grace trusts me completely. Every door Eliza tried to open was politely, firmly closed. The servants avoided her. Conversation stopped when she entered rooms. The maids cleaned her chambers in silence. The footmen looked through her like she was glass. Only Isabel acknowledged her existence, and that was mainly to make cutting observations about how quickly Eliza would break. 3 weeks, Isabel predicted over tea that Eliza had insisted they take together, despite Isabel's obvious reluctance. That's how long before you stop trying and just dissolve into the furniture. I'm not dissolving into anything. They all say that. Isabel examined her nails. But this house is very good at teaching women their place, which is silent, decorative, and ultimately irrelevant. Eliza set down her teacup with deliberate care. Is that where you've been taught to stay? Isabel's eyes flashed. I was born here. I have no choice. Neither do I. So we might as well make the best of it. By doing what? Rearranging flowers? Embroidering pillows? Face it, sister, you're useless here. Victor doesn't want you. The staff doesn't respect you. You have no purpose except to eventually produce an heir, and even that, she smiled cruelly, seems unlikely given how thoroughly Victor avoids you. The words hit like slaps, but Eliza refused to flinch. Then I'll find a purpose, she said quietly. Good luck with that. But after Isabel left, Eliza sat alone in the drawing room and let herself feel the full weight of her isolation. No friends, no family, no husband, no allies, nothing but empty rooms and cold shoulders, and the creeping understanding that she might spend the rest of her life like this. Ignored, irrelevant, slowly fading into nothing. No. She stood abruptly, startling a maid who'd been pretending not to eavesdrop. No, I refuse. If they wouldn't give her a purpose, she'd take one. The next morning, Eliza rose with the sun and went exploring. Not the house this time, but the grounds. What she found was neglect. The gardens that had once been magnificent were overgrown with weeds. Rose bushes choked on their own thorns. Pathways disappeared under encroaching grass. The fountain in the center courtyard was dry, filled with dead leaves and bird droppings. And the greenhouse, the beautiful glass structure she'd seen from her window, was even worse. Half the panes were broken. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. Inside, everything was dead or dying. Expensive orchids reduced to brown sticks. Exotic plants withered in their pots. The whole space reeked of abandonment. She found the head gardener in a shed, an old man named Thomas who looked startled to see her. Your Grace, he said, struggling to his feet, I didn't expect— Why is everything dying? Eliza asked bluntly. Thomas's weathered face creased with sadness. Budget cuts, Your Grace. After the old Duchess passed, His Grace, the old Duke, I mean, said the gardens were a wasteful expense. Cut the staff. Let things go. Young His Grace kept the cuts when he inherited. Says he has no use for flowers. But you stayed. Someone has to try. Thomas gestured helplessly at the dying landscape. I do what I can with no staff and no funds, but It's not enough, Eliza finished. No, Your Grace, it's not. Eliza stood in that broken greenhouse, surrounded by death, and felt something click into place. Purpose. Not the one anyone expected, but purpose nonetheless. What would you need, she asked, to bring all this back? Thomas blinked. Your Grace? Staff, supplies, money. What would it take to restore these grounds to what they were? Oh, I couldn't possibly. His Grace would never. His Grace has made it very clear that household matters are mine to manage, Eliza said, which was technically true if you squinted at Mrs. Hillcrest's dismissals. So I'm asking you, as someone who clearly cares about this place, what would it take? Hope flickered across Thomas's face, fragile as a candle flame. 3 good workers, proper tools, seeds and bulbs for spring planting, glass for the greenhouse, permission to clear the invasive weeds and replant the beds. He hesitated. And time, Your Grace. It would take time. How much? A year, maybe, if we had everything we needed. Then we start today, Eliza said. But, Your Grace, the budget… I have a marriage settlement. Eliza's voice was firm. Money that's mine to spend. If His Grace won't fund the gardens, I will. Thomas looked like he might cry. Your Grace, that's generous, but Mrs. Hillcrest won't allow… Mrs. Hillcrest doesn't have to allow anything, Eliza said, steel entering her voice. I'm the Duchess, and these are my gardens now. The war with Mrs. Hillcrest began that afternoon. Absolutely not, the housekeeper said when Eliza informed her of the plan. His Grace specifically cut the garden budget. I won't authorize… I'm not asking you to authorize anything from the estate accounts, Eliza interrupted. I'm using my own funds. His Grace won't approve. Then His Grace can tell me himself. Eliza met the woman's glare without flinching. If he ever spends more than 5 minutes in my presence… Mrs. Hillcrest's face went red. You overstep, Your Grace. I'm trying to restore something beautiful that's been left to die. If that's overstepping, then I'll overstep gladly. You're a foolish girl playing at being important, Mrs. Hillcrest hissed, dropping all pretense of respect. You think spending money on flowers will make you matter here? You think Victor will suddenly notice you because you've planted roses? You're deluding yourself. The words stung because part of Eliza wondered if they were true, but she straightened her spine and channeled every ounce of her mother's drawing room dignity. Whether I matter to the Duke is irrelevant. The gardens matter to me, and as the lady of this house, I have every right to restore them. Now, will you help me arrange for workers, or should I do it myself? They stared at each other, 2 wills locked in combat. Finally, Mrs. Hillcrest turned away. Do what you like, but when His Grace puts a stop to this nonsense, don't say I didn't warn you. She stalked off, leaving Eliza shaking with adrenaline and fear and something dangerously close to triumph. First battle won, she thought. Now comes the war. Over the next 2 weeks, Eliza threw herself into the work with a ferocity that surprised everyone, including herself. She hired 3 workers from the village, strong young men who needed employment and didn't mind answering to a woman. She ordered supplies from London, spending her settlement with careful deliberation. She worked alongside Thomas from dawn until dusk, learning the names of plants, the rhythms of growth, the patience required to coax life from soil. Her hands blistered, her back ached. Her dresses got muddy and torn. She'd never been happier. For the first time since arriving at Thornwick, she had a purpose. Something that needed her. Something that responded to her care with visible growth and change. The greenhouse was her special project. She and Thomas spent 3 full days replacing broken panes, repairing the frame, clearing out the dead plants. Then came the delicate work of selecting new specimens, orchids, exotic ferns, flowering vines that would eventually climb the restored lattices. It'll be like it was in the old Duchess's time, Thomas said one afternoon, his eyes bright with memory. She used to spend hours in here, said it was her sanctuary. Eliza understood. Surrounded by green growth and the smell of earth, she felt more alive than she had in months. The servants began to notice. Some remained hostile, loyal to Mrs. Hillcrest's disapproval. But others, the younger maids, some of the footmen, the kitchen staff who saw Eliza eating her meals quickly so she could get back to work, began to soften. One afternoon, the cook sent out fresh bread and cheese for the garden workers, including Eliza. For your Grace's luncheon, the kitchen maid said shyly. Cook says you need to keep your strength up. It was a small thing, but after weeks of cold shoulders, it felt like sunlight. Isabel, predictably, was less impressed. You're playing in the dirt like a peasant, she observed, finding Eliza knee-deep in a flower bed one morning. How dignified. I'm restoring the gardens, Eliza said, not looking up from her work. You're welcome to help. I'm welcome to help? Isabel laughed. Do I look like a gardener? You look like someone who's bored. This might cure that. For a moment, Isabel seemed to consider it. Then she shook her head. Victor will hate this, you know. He doesn't like things changing. Victor doesn't like anything, Eliza pointed out. True. Isabel tilted her head, studying Eliza with new interest. You're not breaking yet. I'm almost impressed. High praise. Don't get cocky. The real test comes when Victor actually notices what you're doing. Isabel's smile turned sharp. And he will notice, eventually. And then we'll see if you have as much spine as you're pretending. She left, but her words lingered like a threat. Let him notice, Eliza thought, turning back to her work. Let him try to stop me. I'm done asking permission to exist. 3 weeks into the restoration project, Victor finally emerged from his self-imposed isolation. Eliza was in the greenhouse, carefully transplanting a rare orchid, when the door opened and he strode in. She looked up, dirt on her hands and smudged across her cheek, and felt her heart jolt at the sheer force of his presence. He filled the space like a storm, all controlled power and barely leashed anger. What, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, is this? Eliza set down her trowel with deliberate calm. I'm restoring the greenhouse. I can see that. What I'm asking is why you think you have the right to spend money on this. He gestured at the new glass, the organized plants, the evidence of weeks of hard work. Frivolity without consulting me. I'm using my own funds, not yours. Everything in this house is mine, Victor said flatly, including you. The words hung in the air like poison. Eliza stood slowly, facing him across a table of green growing things. I am your wife, not your property. You are here because I paid your father's debts. That makes you exactly my property. Then I'm property that refuses to sit quietly in a corner collecting dust. Her voice shook, but she held her ground. You made it very clear you don't want a wife. You don't want companionship or conversation or any acknowledgement that I exist. Fine, but I exist anyway, and I need something to do with my life beyond waiting for you to decide you need an heir. So you spend money on plants? I spend money making something beautiful out of something abandoned, Eliza shot back. Is that so incomprehensible to you? That someone might want to create life instead of just managing decline? Something flickered in his eyes, pain maybe, or recognition, but it was gone before she could name it. The gardens were cut for a reason, he said, his voice colder now. They're a waste of resources. Your mother didn't think so. Wrong thing to say. Victor's face went white, then red. Don't you dare! Thomas told me she loved these gardens, that she spent hours here, that before she died this place was alive. Eliza's voice gentled despite her fear. I'm not trying to replace her. I'm trying to honor what she built. By throwing money at dead plants? His voice was cutting. How noble. By refusing to let everything beautiful in this place die just because you've decided beauty is pointless. The words echoed in the greenhouse, sharp and true. Victor stared at her, something dangerous moving behind his eyes. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me, Eliza challenged. Explain why you keep this entire estate running except for the one part that might bring actual joy. Explain why you cut the gardens but maintain the stables. Why you fund the tenant farms but let the greenhouse fall apart. Explain why you've decided that anything your mother loved must be destroyed. Enough! The word cracked like a whip. They stood in silence, breathing hard, surrounded by green life and glass walls that suddenly felt fragile. I don't owe you explanations, Victor finally said, his voice low and lethal. I don't owe you anything except room and board and eventual performance of my contractual duties. Everything else, your time, your interests, your pathetic attempts to matter, is yours to waste however you like. But don't expect me to care. Don't expect me to notice. And don't expect me to suddenly become moved by the fact that you've spent money making the greenhouse pretty." He turned to leave. "I don't expect you to care," Eliza said to his retreating back. "I just expect you to leave me alone to do something that makes this prison bearable." He paused at the door, not looking back. "You'll regret calling it a prison," he said quietly, "when you realize how much worse it could be." Then he was gone, leaving Eliza alone among the plants she'd saved, crying for the first time since arriving at Thornwick, not from sadness, but from rage and frustration, and the terrible understanding that she'd married a man so determined to feel nothing that he'd rather destroy beauty than risk caring about it. But even crying, even shaking, she didn't stop working, because beauty was all she had, and she'd be damned if she let him take that too. The confrontation in the greenhouse changed nothing and everything. Victor returned to his self-imposed exile, disappearing into estate business with even more determination. But now there was a new tension in the air, a crackling awareness that the Duchess wasn't going to fade quietly into the background like a good docile wife should. Eliza felt it in the way servants watched her more carefully now, the way Mrs. Hillcrest's lips thinned whenever they passed in the hallway, the way Isabel studied her with something between amusement and respect. She'd made herself visible, and in a house that preferred its women invisible, that was dangerous. But she didn't stop. By the end of November, the main garden showed real progress. The pathways were cleared, the fountain cleaned and flowing again. Winter roses bloomed in beds she and Thomas had carefully prepared. The greenhouse was her pride, warm and green even as frost painted the windows, full of exotic blooms that shouldn't survive an English winter, but did anyway because she'd learned to care for them properly. The workers she'd hired, John, Peter, and young Michael, had proven loyal and hard-working. They didn't sneer at taking orders from a woman. They didn't whisper about her like the house servants did. They just worked, grateful for fair wages and a mistress who wasn't afraid to get her own hands dirty. "Looking proper now, Your Grace," John said one morning, surveying the restored south garden with satisfaction. "Almost like the old days," Thomas says. "Better than the old days," Thomas corrected, joining them with a rare smile. "Her Grace has an eye for design the old Duchess never had. More practical, better drainage, better sun exposure for the beds." Eliza felt a flush of pride. She'd studied, learned, made mistakes, and corrected them. The gardens were hers now in a way nothing else at Thornwick was. "We'll need to prepare for spring planting soon," she said, consulting her notes. "I've ordered bulbs from Holland, tulips, hyacinths, crocuses. And I want to expand the kitchen garden. The cook mentioned wanting fresh herbs." "Expand?" Michael looked nervous. "But, Your Grace, that'll mean taking over the old stable yard. His Grace won't—" "His Grace has made it clear he doesn't concern himself with household matters," Eliza said firmly, though her stomach tightened. "The old stable yard has been unused for 5 years. It's wasted space." "Still," Peter said carefully, "maybe you should ask—" "I'm not asking permission to make practical improvements," Eliza interrupted. "We're doing it." The men exchanged glances but didn't argue. They'd learned that when the Duchess set her mind to something, opposition was futile. What Eliza didn't mention was that she'd been carefully, methodically expanding her influence beyond just the gardens. It had started small. The cook, Mrs. Davies, had mentioned struggling with unreliable deliveries from local suppliers. Eliza had used her connections, letters to her mother, who'd connected her with better vendors, to establish new supply lines. Suddenly, the kitchen had fresh produce even in winter, quality meat, decent wine. The staff noticed, started thawing. Then she'd noticed the maids were overworked. Mrs. Hillcrest ran a skeleton crew, squeezing maximum work from minimum staff. Eliza quietly hired 2 more girls from the village, paying them from her settlement, claiming she needed personal attendance. Mrs. Hillcrest couldn't object without admitting the household was understaffed. The maids started smiling at her in the hallways. Small victories, tiny rebellions. But they added up. She was building something. Not just gardens, but a foundation. A place to stand in this house that had tried to make her disappear. The first real test came on a freezing December morning. Eliza was in the greenhouse, checking on a temperamental orchid that refused to bloom when she heard shouting from outside. She ran out to find Mrs. Hillcrest on the garden path, face red with fury, confronting Thomas and the workers. Unauthorized changes. Her Grace has no right. What's happening? Eliza demanded, pulling on her coat as she hurried over. Mrs. Hillcrest whirled on her. Your men are tearing down the old stable wall, without permission, without authorization. This is completely inappropriate. I authorized it, Eliza said calmly. We're converting the space for the kitchen garden. You authorized nothing. You don't have the authority. Mrs. Hillcrest's voice rose to a near shriek. I am the housekeeper of this estate. I manage all improvements and changes. You are just— I am the Duchess, Eliza said quietly, but with steel underneath. And the kitchen garden expansion is happening. We'll see what His Grace has to say about that. Then ask him, Eliza challenged. I'm sure he'll be delighted to be interrupted from his important work to discuss vegetable plots. Mrs. Hillcrest's face went purple. She opened her mouth, clearly preparing a devastating response, when a new voice cut across the garden. What is this noise? Everyone froze. Victor stood at the top of the garden steps, dressed for riding, his face thunderous. He must have been heading to the stables when the commotion caught his attention. Your Grace! Mrs. Hillcrest rushed toward him. Thank heavens! Your wife has completely overstepped. The Duchess, Victor said coldly, is standing right there. Address your concerns to her directly. Mrs. Hillcrest faltered. But Your Grace, surely you don't approve of— I don't approve or disapprove of anything I haven't been consulted about. His eyes moved to Eliza, cold and assessing. Though I'm curious why I'm being interrupted from my morning ride to discuss gardens. Your Grace, Mrs. Hillcrest tried again, the Duchess has ordered the old stable wall demolished without consulting anyone. I consulted Thomas, Eliza interrupted, and the workers, and myself. The wall is unstable and the space is wasted. We're converting it to expand the kitchen garden so the household can have fresh vegetables year-round instead of relying on expensive deliveries. The expense, Mrs. Hillcrest started. Will be minimal, Eliza continued, holding Victor's gaze, because I'm funding it, and the return on investment will be immediate. Fresh produce, lower food costs, better meals for the staff. It's practical. Silence fell over the garden. Victor studied her, his expression unreadable. The workers stood frozen. Mrs. Hillcrest looked triumphant, clearly expecting him to shut this down immediately. Practical, Victor repeated slowly. Yes. And you've thought through the logistics? Drainage, soil quality, sun exposure? Thomas and I have surveyed the area thoroughly. The southern exposure is ideal. We'll need to bring in good soil, but the drainage is actually better than the current kitchen garden location. More silence. Then Victor turned to Mrs. Hillcrest. Do you have any practical objections to this plan? The housekeeper sputtered. It's not proper. The Duchess shouldn't be making these decisions without oversight. That's not a practical objection. That's a complaint about protocol. He looked back at Eliza. If you're funding this yourself and it improves the household efficiency, I have no objection. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Thank you, Your Grace. Don't thank me. I simply don't care enough to stop you. He started to turn away, then paused. But Duchess, if this project fails, if it wastes money or creates problems, it will be the last independent decision you make at Thornwick. Am I clear? Perfectly clear. He nodded once and strode away toward the stables, leaving shocked silence in his wake. Mrs. Hillcrest looked like she'd been slapped. This is highly irregular, but approved, Eliza said firmly. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do. She turned back to the wall, hands shaking but voice steady. Gentlemen, let's continue. As they returned to work, she caught Thomas's eye. He was grinning. Well, he said quietly, that was something. It was something, but Eliza knew she'd just raised the stakes considerably. Victor had given her rope, but also made it clear that rope could become a noose if she failed. Then I won't fail, she thought, watching the old wall come down. I can't afford to. The kitchen garden project consumed the next 3 weeks. Despite the winter cold, Eliza pushed forward with fierce determination. They cleared the old stable yard, hauled away decades of debris, brought in cartloads of good soil mixed with composted manure that made Isabel wrinkle her nose whenever she passed by. You smell like a barnyard, Isabel observed one afternoon, finding Eliza supervising the construction of raised beds. I smell like progress, Eliza corrected, wiping sweat from her forehead despite the December chill. You smell like desperation. But there was less cruelty in Isabel's voice than usual. You know this won't make him love you, right? All this work, all this effort. Victor doesn't care. I'm not doing it for Victor. Then why are you doing it? Eliza paused, leaning on her shovel. It was a fair question. Because it needs doing. Because people depend on this estate, and it's been neglected. Because I need to matter, even if it's just to the vegetables. Isabel was quiet for a long moment. You're very strange. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. I'm choosing to take it as one anyway. A ghost of a smile crossed Isabel's face. Then she shocked Eliza by picking up a pair of work gloves someone had left on a bench. Show me what to do, she said. What? I'm bored. You're at least interesting when you're being stubborn. Isabel pulled on the gloves awkwardly. And if I'm going to be trapped in this miserable house, I might as well do something besides embroidery and gossip. Eliza stared at her sister-in-law, this sharp-tongued woman who'd done nothing but mock her for weeks. You'll get dirty, she warned. I'm already dirty by association living in this house. Isabel gestured impatiently. Come on, put me to work before I change my mind. So Eliza did. By sunset, Isabel had dirt under her fingernails, mud on her expensive dress, and was laughing, actually laughing, as she and Eliza struggled to position a particularly stubborn stone border. This is ridiculous, Isabel gasped, pushing hair out of her face with a muddy hand. I'm a lady. I shouldn't be hauling rocks. Then stop, Eliza challenged. Absolutely not. I'm going to prove I'm stronger than you. You're not. Am too. They dissolved into giggles, and for a moment Eliza felt something dangerously close to friendship. The moment shattered when Victor appeared at the garden gate. He stopped, taking in the scene, his sister covered in mud, laughing with his wife, both of them filthy and disheveled and clearly enjoying themselves. His face went carefully blank. Isabel, he said, you're needed inside. Lady Ashford has called. The laughter died. Isabel's expression shuddered. Of course, wouldn't want to keep her ladyship waiting. She stripped off the gloves, handed them to Eliza without meeting her eyes, and walked past Victor without another word. Eliza stood alone in the garden, suddenly aware of how she must look. Muddy, sweating, her hair falling out of its pins, her dress ruined beyond saving. Victor's eyes swept over her, cold and assessing. You're corrupting my sister. I'm giving her something to do besides be miserable. She's a lady. She shouldn't be... He gestured at the muddy garden, the half-built beds, the evidence of physical labor. Doing this? Why not? I'm a lady too. You're different. How? He seemed to struggle for words. You have reasons to debase yourself. She doesn't. The words stung like a slap. Debase herself. As if honest work was shameful. As if creating something was degrading. Is that what you think I'm doing? Eliza asked quietly. Debasing myself? I think you're playing at being a peasant because it makes you feel useful. I am useful. I'm creating a sustainable food source for this household. I'm employing workers who need jobs. You're spending money and energy on something that will never matter to anyone but yourself. His voice was flat, final. And now you're dragging Isabel into your delusions. They're not delusions. They are. He stepped closer, and Eliza saw something dangerous in his eyes. You think if you work hard enough, care enough, restore enough of this dying estate, something will change, that I'll suddenly see you as more than a contractual obligation, that this house will become warm, that your life here will mean something. It already means something. It doesn't. The words fell like stones. You're rearranging furniture on a sinking ship. All this effort, all this hope, it's pointless. This house doesn't get better. It doesn't warm up. It just slowly crushes everything beautiful until there's nothing left but duty and endurance. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Then why are you still here? If it's so crushing, so hopeless, why stay? For a moment, something raw flickered across his face. Pain, longing, despair. Then the mask slammed back down. "Because I have no choice," he said simply, "and neither do you." He turned and walked away, leaving Eliza standing in her garden, her beautiful, thriving, useful garden, feeling like maybe he was right. Maybe she was just rearranging furniture while everything sank. But the feeling didn't last. That night, lying in her cold bed in her cold room, Eliza made a decision. Let him think it's pointless. Let him think I'm delusional. I'll prove him wrong. The next morning, she worked twice as hard. Christmas approached like a threat. The village expected the Duke and Duchess of Thornwick to host the traditional Christmas gathering, a responsibility the estate had shirked for years. Mrs. Hillcrest made it clear she thought the tradition should remain dead. "His Grace doesn't celebrate Christmas," she said firmly when Eliza raised the subject. "Not since the old Duchess passed." "Why not?" "She died on Christmas Eve." Mrs. Hillcrest's voice held grim satisfaction. "So you see, it's impossible." But Eliza saw something else, an opportunity. The tenants needed it. The village needed it. The estate needed something besides cold efficiency and emotional winter. She found Victor in his study late one evening, buried in paperwork as always. "I want to host a Christmas gathering," she said without preamble. He didn't look up. "No." "The tenants expect it. The village expects it. It's tradition." I said no. "Why?" Now he looked up and his eyes were ice. "Because I don't celebrate Christmas. Because I don't want my house filled with villagers pretending to be grateful while they gossip about how miserable the Duke looks. Because—" He stopped himself. "Because your mother died on Christmas Eve," Eliza finished quietly. His jaw clenched. "Mrs. Hillcrest talks too much." "She didn't tell me to be cruel. She told me so I'd understand." Eliza moved closer to his desk. "But Victor, that was 17 years ago. Are you going to mourn forever?" "I'm not mourning. I simply see no point in forced celebration. It's not forced if people genuinely need it." She placed her hands on his desk, leaning forward. "Your tenants work hard all year. They deserve an evening of warmth and food and community. The village depends on the estate's generosity. And your staff, when was the last time they had anything to celebrate? They're adequately compensated. Compensation isn't the same as appreciation." This discussion is over. He returned to his papers with finality. "No Christmas gathering. That's final." Eliza stared at the top of his head, frustration boiling in her chest. "Fine," she said. "Then I'll host it myself." That got his attention. "Excuse me? You don't want to celebrate Christmas. I understand, but I'm the Duchess, and if I choose to open the house to tenants and villagers for a modest gathering, that's within my rights." "The hell it is! You've made it very clear that household matters are my domain. You've given me authority over the gardens, the kitchen, the servants. Well, hospitality is a household matter." She straightened, chin high. "So I'm hosting a Christmas gathering. You're welcome to hide in your study. You're welcome to glower disapprovingly from the doorway, but you will not stop me from showing basic human kindness to people who've had precious little of it from this house." Victor stood slowly, dangerously. "You're pushing too far." "I'm pushing exactly as far as I need to." Her heart hammered, but she held her ground. "You wanted a wife who'd sit quietly and not bother you, but you married me, and I don't sit quietly when people are suffering from neglect." "They're not suffering." "They are. I've talked to them. I've visited the tenant farms. I've seen how little connection there is between this estate and the people who depend on it. You throw money at problems and call it responsibility, but you give nothing of yourself." "Well, I will." "This is about my mother. This is about your tenants." Eliza's voice rose. "This is about doing right by people who deserve better than a lord who hides from them. Your mother's death was a tragedy, but it was 17 years ago, and punishing everyone else for it by withdrawing completely doesn't honor her memory. It spits on everything she built." The words hung in the air like explosions. Victor's face had gone white. "Get out! Victor, get out!" His voice was so cold, so deadly, that Eliza actually stepped back. Then she caught herself, straightened her spine. "I'm hosting the Christmas gathering," she said quietly. "With or without your blessing." She left before he could respond, shaking so hard she had to lean against the wall outside his study. Too far, she thought. I pushed too far. But she didn't regret it. Planning the Christmas gathering became an act of quiet rebellion. Mrs. Hillcrest refused to help, of course. When His Grace shuts this down, don't expect sympathy from me. But others stepped forward. Mrs. Davies, the cook, embraced the project with enthusiasm. About time this house had some life in it, she said, already planning menus. The maids pitched in, eager for something besides their usual drudgery. Even Isabel helped, though she claimed it was only because watching Eliza defy Victor was entertaining. He's going to explode, Isabel predicted, helping Eliza plan the guest list. Absolutely detonate. Then he detonates. You're braver than I thought, Isabel studied her. Or stupider. Haven't decided which. Can it be both? They worked through late December preparing the great hall that hadn't been used in years. Cleaning, decorating with holly and pine branches, arranging tables and chairs. Eliza invited carefully tenant families, village notables, estate workers, people who needed an evening of warmth and plenty. Invitations went out. Acceptances came back. The gathering was happening. Victor said nothing. He didn't stop her, didn't acknowledge the preparations happening throughout his house, just retreated further into his work, avoiding Eliza completely. Let him sulk, she thought, directing the hanging of greenery in the great hall. I'm done begging for permission to care about people, but she was terrified he'd ruin everything at the last moment. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in fresh snow and freezing wind. The great hall looked beautiful, transformed from its usual cold grandeur into something warm and welcoming. Candles glowed on every surface. Pine branches scented the air. Tables groaned under Mrs. Davies' magnificent cooking. Eliza stood at the entrance in her best dress, watching the first guests arrive, and felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. Please let this work, she thought. Please let this matter. The tenants came first, families she'd visited over the past weeks, people who worked the estate's farms and maintained its boundaries. They entered cautiously, unused to being welcomed into the great house, but slowly relaxed as servants offered mulled wine and Eliza greeted each person by name. Then village families, the blacksmith, the vicar, the shopkeepers who supplied the estate. Soon the hall filled with conversation, laughter, warmth. Children ran between tables. Farmers compared notes on the harvest. Women admired the decorations. Everyone ate and drank and forgot, for a few hours, the hardness of their lives. Eliza moved through the crowd, making sure everyone was welcomed, fed, comfortable. She felt more alive than she had in months. Then she saw him. Victor stood in the doorway to the great hall, partially hidden in shadow, watching. Her heart stopped. He was going to shut it down, going to order everyone out, going to punish her for this defiance. But he didn't move, just stood there, watching his house come alive with warmth and laughter and community. Their eyes met across the crowded hall. His expression was unreadable. Then he turned and disappeared back into the shadows. Eliza wanted to follow, to explain, to make him understand, but her guests needed her, so she stayed. The evening progressed beautifully. Mrs. Davies outdid herself with the food. The vicar led carols that filled the hall with music. Children received small gifts Eliza had quietly purchased, toys and sweets that made them squeal with delight. As the clock approached midnight, old Thomas stood and raised his cup. "A toast," he called, and the hall quieted. "To Her Grace, the Duchess, who brought life back to Thornwick." "To Her Grace," the crowd echoed, raising their cups. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. This was worth every battle, every cold shoulder, every moment of doubt. This mattered. The gathering wound down near 1 in the morning. Families bundled their sleepy children and headed home through the snow, calling thanks and blessings. Eliza stood at the door, bidding each guest farewell, until finally the hall was empty except for servants clearing tables. She helped them clean, despite protests, too energized to sleep. "Your Grace," Mrs. Davies said gently, "you should rest. You've been on your feet all evening." "I'm fine. I want to—" "You did well." Eliza spun. Victor stood in the doorway again, still half in shadow. He looked exhausted. And something else, raw, maybe. vulnerable. I didn't think you'd approve, Eliza said quietly. I don't. But his voice lacked conviction. You went behind my back, defied my explicit wishes, spent money on sentiment. Yes. You made me look weak, as if I can't control my own wife. I made you look human, as if you care about your people. Silence stretched between them. My mother used to host Christmas gatherings, Victor said finally, his voice so quiet Eliza had to strain to hear. Exactly like this, the hall full of tenants and villagers, food and music and… He stopped. And warmth, Eliza finished. And warmth. He looked at her directly for the first time, and she saw pain in his eyes. When she died, I thought if I let it happen again, if I let the house be warm again, you'd remember what you lost. Yes. Eliza moved closer, cautious as approaching a wounded animal. But Victor, punishing everyone else doesn't bring her back. Keeping the house cold doesn't honor her. It just means her warmth died with her, instead of living on. I know. The admission seemed to cost him. I know that. But knowing doesn't change… He stopped again, jaw tight. They stood in the candlelit hall, surrounded by evidence of community and care, and for the first time Eliza saw the man beneath the ice. Thank you, Victor said finally. For tonight. For defying me. For being stubborn enough to do what needed doing despite my… He gestured vaguely. Resistance. You're welcome. He nodded once, then turned to leave. Victor? He paused. It doesn't have to stay cold, Eliza said softly. The house, your life, it could warm up if you let it. For a long moment he just stood there, back to her, silent. I don't know how, he finally said, and walked away into the darkness. Eliza stood alone in the hall, watching him disappear, and felt something shift. Not victory, not even progress exactly, but possibility. For the first time since arriving at Thornwick, she believed the ice might crack. The question was whether either of them would survive the thaw. The thaw that began on Christmas Eve lasted exactly 3 days. Then winter returned with a vengeance, not just in the weather, but in Victor himself. He retreated back into his armor of ice and distance, avoiding Eliza as thoroughly as before. If anything, he seemed more determined to prove that one moment of vulnerability changed nothing. But something had changed in Eliza. She'd glimpsed the man beneath the frost, and now she couldn't unsee him. Couldn't stop wondering what had broken him so completely that he'd rather freeze than feel. January brought brutal cold, and something worse, rumors. It started with whispers in the village. Eliza heard them when she visited the market with Mrs. Davies, needing to approve selections for the household. Women stopped talking when she approached. Men tipped their hats, but their eyes held speculation, not respect. What are they saying? Eliza asked Mrs. Davies as they returned to the carriage. The cook's face tightened. Nothing worth repeating, Your Grace. Tell me anyway, Mrs. Davies sighed. There's talk about you and His Grace, about the marriage being unconsummated, about you spending all your time in the gardens with the workers, about… She stopped, looking miserable. About what? About young Michael, one of the gardeners you hired. Mrs. Davies met her eyes. People are saying there's something improper happening, that you're too familiar with the staff, that His Grace doesn't care because he doesn't want you anyway. Eliza felt like she'd been slapped. That's absurd. Michael is barely 20 and I've never… I know, Your Grace, anyone with eyes can see it's nonsense. But people talk, especially when a duchess acts different than they expect. Different. The word stung because it was true. She did act different, working alongside servants, getting her hands dirty, refusing to be the decorative ornament society expected. And now she was being punished for it. The rumors grew worse over the following week. Anonymous letters started arriving at the house. Cruel, vicious things accusing Eliza of adultery, of degrading herself, of making the Duke a laughingstock. Mrs. Hillcrest delivered them with barely concealed satisfaction. Perhaps Your Grace will reconsider her unconventional behavior now. Eliza burned the letters, but their poison lingered. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. She was in the greenhouse, as usual, checking on seedlings with Thomas and Michael, when the door burst open and Victor strode in, his face a mask of fury. "Out," he ordered Thomas and Michael. "Both of you, now." The men fled. Victor turned on Eliza, and she saw something dangerous in his eyes. Not just anger, but pain, humiliation. "Do you know what I heard at my club today?" His voice was deadly quiet. 3 separate men asked me how I managed to keep my dignity while my wife runs wild with the gardeners. They asked if I'm so inadequate as a husband that you have to seek satisfaction elsewhere. That's ridiculous. Is it? He moved closer, and Eliza backed up against the work table. "You spend every waking hour out here with young men. You work alongside them like you're one of them. You ignore every social convention, every expectation of how a duchess should behave, and now the entire county thinks you're making a fool of me." "I'm doing honest work. You're destroying my reputation." The words exploded out of him. "Do you understand what that means? My business partners, my political allies, they're all laughing at me, pitying me, suggesting I can't control my own wife, can't satisfy her, can't command basic respect in my own household." Eliza's hands clenched on the table edge. "So this is about your pride? This is about you humiliating me at every turn?" His voice rose. "First the gardens, then Christmas, now this. You push and push, ignoring my wishes, defying my authority, and when there are consequences, you act shocked. The only consequence is gossip from people who have nothing better to do than speculate about our marriage. That gossip affects everything." Victor slammed his hand on the table, making tools jump. "My investments, my partnerships, my standing in Parliament. Men don't trust a lord who can't manage his own house. And your behavior, your constant need to prove you're different, special, above the normal rules, makes me look weak. I'm not trying to make you look anything. I'm trying to survive in this prison you've locked me in." "Prison?" He laughed, harsh and bitter. "You have everything, money, status, freedom to do whatever you want. How is that a prison?" "Because I have no one." The words tore out of her. "You avoid me. The servants fear me. The society you're so worried about will never accept me because I'm the poor relation who married up. All I have is this." She gestured at the greenhouse, the plants, the evidence of her work. "And you want to take even that away because it embarrasses you. I want you to behave like a duchess, not a farmhand. Then maybe you should have married a duchess instead of buying a desperate girl to fulfill your contractual obligations." The silence that followed was explosive. Victor's face had gone white. When he spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze bone. "You're right. I should have." He turned toward the door. "Consider this your warning. Stop working in the gardens. Stop fraternizing with the staff. Start behaving like the lady you're supposed to be, or I will make you." "Make me how?" Eliza challenged, reckless with rage and hurt. "Lock me in my room? Send me away? Divorce me and face the scandal?" He looked back at her, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'll cut off your funds," he said simply. "Every penny of your settlement goes through accounts I control. Defy me again, and you'll have nothing. No garden projects, no independence, nothing but what I choose to give you, when I choose to give it." "You wouldn't try me!" He walked out, leaving Eliza shaking with fury and terror, because she knew he would, knew he'd take away the only thing that made this life bearable, just to prove he still had power over something. She sank onto a bench, surrounded by the green life she'd cultivated, and felt the walls closing in. For 2 days, Eliza withdrew. She stayed in her chambers, refusing meals, refusing visitors. Let them think she was broken. Let Victor think he'd won. But in reality, she was planning. If he could take away her money, she'd find another way. If he could control her through finances, she'd find resources he couldn't touch. The answer came from an unexpected source. Isabel appeared at her door on the 3rd day, looking uncharacteristically serious. "You need to eat something," she said, setting down a tray. "Starving yourself won't change anything." "I'm not hungry." "Neither was I, after Father threatened to cut me off if I didn't marry Lord Ashford." Isabel sat on the edge of Eliza's bed. "I refused. He followed through. For 2 years I had nothing except what I could earn myself." Eliza looked up, surprised. "You worked?" "I wrote articles for ladies' magazines under a pen name. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Isabel's smile was sharp. Father was furious when he found out. Said I was degrading the family name. Eventually he relented on the marriage demand, but the damage was done. He died still angry at me for refusing to be obedient. Why are you telling me this? Because Victor is doing the same thing Father did, using money as control because it's the only power he has left. Isabel stood, moving to the window. But money isn't everything. You've already proven that. You've made people loyal to you. The cook, the gardeners, some of the servants. You've created something that matters. That's power too. Power that disappears the moment Victor cuts off my funds. Does it? Isabel turned back. The garden workers, you hired them with your settlement, yes, but they're loyal to you now, not to your money. Thomas would work for free if you asked. Mrs. Davies already bends household rules for you. Even some of the maids prefer you to Mrs. Hillcrest. That doesn't help me keep the gardens running. No, but it means you have allies. Isabel moved closer, her voice dropping. And I have money. Father left me a considerable inheritance that Victor can't touch. If you need funds to continue your work, to maintain your independence, I'll provide them. Eliza stared at her sister-in-law. Why would you do that? Because watching you stand up to Victor is the most interesting thing that's happened in this house in years. Because you're the first person who's ever treated me like a friend instead of a political inconvenience. And because Isabel's voice went softer. Someone should fight back. Someone should prove that the Blackthorn way isn't the only way. If Victor finds out, let him. I'm tired of being afraid. Isabel held out her hand. Are you? Eliza looked at that outstretched hand and saw a lifeline, a choice, a chance to keep fighting instead of surrendering. She took it. Tell me what you need, Isabel said. That night, they planned. Isabel would quietly fund the gardens and staff through her own accounts. Eliza would be more careful about public perception, less time working alongside the gardeners, more time supervising from a proper distance. They'd play the game Victor wanted, at least superficially, while building something real underneath. You'll have to be subtle, Isabel warned. Victor's watching now. Any more open defiance and he'll crack down harder. I can be subtle. Can you? You have all the subtlety of a thunderstorm. Eliza managed a weak smile. Then I'll learn. But fate had other plans. The crisis came on a night in late January, during one of the worst storms Eliza had ever seen. It started at dusk, rain lashing the windows, wind howling around the house like a living thing. By nightfall, it had escalated into something terrifying. Thunder cracked like artillery. Lightning turned the world white and black. The wind tore at Thornwick like it wanted to rip the house from its foundation. Eliza stood at her window, watching nature's fury, and felt a deep unease. The greenhouse, all that glass, that delicate structure. A massive lightning strike lit the world, and in that flash of brilliance, Eliza saw it. The greenhouse's roof was lifting in the wind, panes shattering, the whole structure starting to come apart. She didn't think. Just grabbed her cloak and ran. Your Grace! A maid tried to stop her at the stairs. You can't go out in this. Eliza pushed past her, racing through the house, out the side door into the storm. The wind hit her like a physical force, nearly knocking her down. Rain soaked her instantly, cold as ice. She could barely see through the downpour, but she pushed forward toward the greenhouse, toward the plants that represented months of work and hope. The scene that greeted her was devastation. Half the roof was gone, torn away by the wind. Rain poured in, flooding the beds. Broken glass littered everything. The exotic orchids, the carefully cultivated seedlings, the plants she'd saved from death, all exposed to the storm's fury. No, she whispered, then louder, no! She waded into the destruction, trying to save what she could. Grabbed pots, dragged them toward the still intact section. Cut her hands on broken glass, didn't care. Had to save something, anything. What the hell are you doing? She spun to find Victor in the greenhouse doorway, as soaked as she was, his face a mask of shock and fury. Saving the plants? They're just plants. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. You're going to get yourself killed over flowers. They're not just flowers. She wrenched free, turning back to grab another pot. They're everything I've built, everything that matters. The wind chose that moment to rip away another section of roof. Glass exploded inward. Victor threw himself over Eliza, covering her body with his as shards rained down. They hit the ground hard, Victor's weight pinning her. For a moment, there was only the sound of the storm and their ragged breathing. Then Victor pulled back, his hands gripping her shoulders, his face inches from hers. "Are you insane?" he shouted over the wind. "You could have been killed. So could you," she shouted back. "Why did you come out here?" For a moment, he looked utterly lost. "I don't know. I saw you running into the storm, and I couldn't." Another section of roof groaned ominously. "We need to go," Victor said, trying to pull her up. But Eliza looked at the plant still exposed to the storm, dying in the wind and rain, and something broke in her. "No, I won't lose this. I won't let everything die again." "Eliza, you don't understand." Tears mixed with rain on her face. "This is all I have. These gardens, these plants, they're the only thing in this whole estate that needs me, that responds to my care, that proves I'm not completely useless. If I let them die, if I just walk away because it's dangerous or difficult, then what am I? Just another decoration in your house that you ignore." Victor stared at her, something shifting in his eyes. Then, impossibly, he started moving, not toward the door but deeper into the greenhouse. "What are you doing?" Eliza called. "Saving your damn plants," he shouted back. "Tell me what needs to be moved." For a heartbeat, she was too shocked to respond. Then she was moving too, pointing out the most valuable specimens, the ones that couldn't be replaced. Victor grabbed pots with no regard for his expensive clothes or his dignity, hauling them to the protected section. Working alongside her in the chaos, both of them soaked and bleeding from glass cuts and fighting the storm together. It was insane, dangerous, completely irrational. It was the most alive Eliza had felt since her wedding day. They worked until their hands were raw, until the worst of the storm passed, until everything salvageable had been moved to safety. Then they collapsed against the greenhouse wall, exhausted and shaking. "That was stupid," Victor said, breathing hard. "I know. We could have died. I know. For plants. They're not just—" Eliza started, then stopped, looked at him, really looked at him. This cold, controlled man sitting in the mud and broken glass, his perfect clothes ruined, his hands bleeding, his hair plastered to his skull, and he was almost smiling. "You're insane," he said again, but his voice held something new, something warm. "So are you. You came out in the storm after me. Someone had to stop you from killing yourself. You could have sent servants." He stopped, his smile fading. "I saw you running into the storm and I didn't think, just acted. I couldn't let you—" Another pause. "I couldn't watch you die." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. "Why?" Eliza whispered. Victor looked at her, and for the first time since their wedding, his walls came completely down. She saw everything, the pain, the loneliness, the desperate fear underneath all that ice. "Because you're the only thing in this house that's alive," he said roughly. "The only person who fights instead of fading. The only one who looks at all this death and decay and refuses to accept it. And I—" His voice cracked. "I can't lose that. Can't lose you." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. "Victor, my mother died in my arms," he said suddenly, the words pouring out like he couldn't stop them. "On Christmas Eve. I was 12. I held her while she struggled to breathe, while the fever burned through her, while she begged me to take care of Father and Isabel. And I couldn't save her, couldn't do anything but watch her die. That wasn't your fault. Father said it was. Said if I'd been more vigilant, if I'd called the doctor sooner, if I'd done everything differently, she might have lived." Victor's hands clenched. And maybe he was right. Maybe I could have saved her if I'd been better, stronger, less of a failure. You were a child. I was her son. I should have protected her. He looked down at his bleeding hands. After she died, Father became obsessed with control, with making sure nothing else could go wrong, nothing else could hurt us. He cut away everything that made life worth living, the gardens, the celebrations, the warmth, said they were vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and his voice dropped to a whisper. I believed him. Became exactly what he wanted. Cold. Controlled. Safe. But not happy. Happiness is a luxury. Safety is survival. Eliza reached out slowly, carefully, and took his bleeding hand in hers. That's not survival, she said gently. That's a different kind of death. Slower, maybe, but just as final. Victor's fingers tightened around hers, almost painful. I don't know how to be different. I've been frozen so long, I don't remember what warmth feels like. Then learn, Eliza said. I'll teach you. We'll learn together. He looked at her like she was offering him something impossible, something he wanted desperately but didn't dare reach for. I've been terrible to you, he said. Cruel, dismissive. I've given you every reason to hate me. I don't hate you. I hate what you've become. But I've seen glimpses of who you could be, who you were before the ice. She squeezed his hand. That's who I want to know. For a long moment, Victor just stared at their joined hands. Then slowly, carefully, like he was afraid she'd shatter, he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. It was the first time he'd touched her with anything resembling tenderness. I don't deserve you, he whispered against her skin. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. A laugh escaped him, rough, surprised, real. You're impossible. I know. They sat in the wreckage of the greenhouse, holding hands, and something that had been frozen for 17 years began finally to thaw. But the moment couldn't last. The greenhouse door slammed open and Mrs. Hillcrest stormed in, her face a mask of fury. This is completely unacceptable, she shouted. Your Grace, both of you, out in the storm like common fools. The entire household in chaos. And for what? Plants? Victor stood slowly, pulling Eliza up with him, but not releasing her hand. Mrs. Hillcrest, he said quietly, you're dismissed. The housekeeper froze. Your Grace? You're dismissed from your position, effective immediately. You can't. I've served this house for 20 years, and for 20 years you've made it clear you value protocol over people, control over kindness. That ends now. Victor's voice was steel. Pack your things. You'll receive a generous severance, but I want you gone by morning. Mrs. Hillcrest's face went purple. This is her fault. She pointed at Eliza. That woman has corrupted you, turned you against loyal servants. That woman is my wife, Victor interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. And you will address her with respect or not at all. She's a fortune hunter who's manipulated you. Out! The word cracked like thunder. Mrs. Hillcrest actually stepped back, shocked into silence. Then she drew herself up with wounded dignity. You'll regret this. Both of you. This house will fall apart without proper management. Then we'll rebuild it, Eliza said, finding her voice. Better than before. Mrs. Hillcrest's laugh was bitter. You think you've won. You think one dramatic moment in a storm changes everything. But you're still the desperate girl who married for money, and he's still the broken man who can't love anyone. This won't last. It never does. She swept out, leaving poisonous silence in her wake. Eliza felt Victor's hand tighten around hers. She looked up to find him staring after Mrs. Hillcrest, his expression conflicted. She's wrong, Eliza said firmly. About all of it. Is she? Victor's voice was quiet. Am I broken beyond repair? No, just frozen. There's a difference. He looked down at her and something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. What if I can't thaw? What if I try and fail and end up hurting you worse than I already have? Then we fail together, Eliza said. But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have fought for something real instead of just surviving. For a long moment, Victor just looked at her. Then slowly, carefully, he raised his free hand to her face, cupping her cheek with bleeding fingers. You terrify me, he whispered. This terrifies me. Feeling anything terrifies me. I know. But I want to try. The words came out rough, uncertain. I want to be the man you see when you look at me like that, like I'm worth saving. You are worth saving. Then save me, Victor said, and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, hungry. 17 years of loneliness and fear poured into a single moment of connection. Eliza kissed him back just as fiercely, tasting rain and blood and something that might have been hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "How to be a husband, how to let someone close." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." "What if I fail? What if I retreat again?" "Then I'll drag you back out, just like you dragged me out of the storm." He laughed, and the sound was beautiful, rough and real and alive. They stood in the wreckage of the greenhouse, holding each other, and outside the storm raged on. But inside, in that moment, there was warmth. The question was whether it would be enough to survive what came next. Because as they finally made their way back to the house, soaked and bleeding and transformed, neither of them saw the figure watching from a window above. Isabel stood in the shadows, her face unreadable, holding a letter that had arrived that afternoon. A letter that would change everything. A letter that threatened to destroy the fragile beginning of warmth before it could take root. She looked down at the paper in her hand, then out at her brother and his wife stumbling through the rain together, and made a decision that would test all of them. But that revelation would have to wait. For now, Victor and Eliza had this moment, this first crack in the ice, this dangerous beginning of something that might be love or might be disaster. Only time would tell which. The storm outside finally began to ease, but the real storm was only beginning. The morning after the storm, Thornwick woke to a different world. The devastation was visible everywhere. Broken tree limbs scattered across the grounds, roof tiles missing from the stables, the greenhouse a skeletal ruin of twisted metal and shattered glass. But inside the house, something else had shifted. Something the servants felt immediately, even if they couldn't name it. The Duke and Duchess had breakfast together. Not at opposite ends of the formal dining table, but in the small morning room, sitting close enough to speak without shouting. Victor's hand rested near Eliza's on the table, not quite touching, but close enough to suggest intimacy. Their clothes from the night before had been ruined beyond saving, their hands bandaged, but neither seemed to care. The kitchen staff whispered about it all morning. "Did you see how he looked at her?" one maid breathed to another. "Like she's the only person in the room," the other confirmed. "I've never seen His Grace look at anyone like that." Mrs. Davies smiled into her mixing bowl, saying nothing but feeling vindicated. She'd known the young Duchess had steel in her spine, known that eventually something had to give. But not everyone was pleased. The news of Mrs. Hillcrest's dismissal spread through the household like wildfire, creating immediate division. The older servants, loyal to the former housekeeper's rigid management, were scandalized. The younger ones, who'd chafed under her harsh rule, were cautiously optimistic. And then there was Isabel. She appeared at breakfast looking drawn and worried, the letter from the previous night clutched in her hand. Victor noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, and Eliza felt a flutter of warmth at how quickly he'd become attuned to his sister's moods. Isabel glanced at Eliza, then back at her brother. "We need to talk, privately. Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of my wife." The casual possessiveness in those words, "my wife," made Eliza's heart skip. Isabel sank into a chair, looking suddenly exhausted. "It's about the estate finances. I received a letter from Father's old solicitor yesterday. There's a problem." Victor went very still. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that could destroy us." Isabel placed the letter on the table. "Father made some investments before he died. Risky ones. They're coming due, and if they fail, which they're about to, we'll lose nearly 40% of the estate's capital." The color drained from Victor's face. "That's impossible. I reviewed all of Father's holdings when I inherited. These were hidden, kept in separate accounts under assumed names. The solicitor only found them because one of the creditors started making inquiries." Isabel's voice was tight. "Father was gambling, Victor, just like Eliza's father, trying to recoup losses from earlier bad investments. He hid it from everyone." Eliza watched Victor's hands clench on the table, his knuckles going white. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. "If the investments fail, and they will, they're tied to a mining operation that's already collapsed. We'll have to sell land, a lot of land, possibly the tenant farms on the western border, maybe more." "No." Victor's voice was flat, final. "Those farms support 30 families. I won't throw them out." Then we need to find another solution. Fast. Isabel looked between them. The creditors are demanding payment by the end of March. That's 8 weeks. Silence fell over the breakfast table. Eliza's mind raced. Tenant families losing their homes. The estate crippled financially. Everything Victor had worked to maintain, destroyed by his father's secret gambling. It was too familiar, too much like her own family's collapse. But there was one critical difference. "How much do we need?" she asked. Isabel named a sum that made Eliza's stomach drop. It was staggering. More than her entire marriage settlement. More than any reasonable person could raise in 8 weeks. Victor was already shaking his head. "We'll have to sell the land. There's no other way." "There might be," Eliza said slowly. Both siblings looked at her. "The estate produces wool, doesn't it? From the sheep farms on the northern border?" "Yes," Victor said, "but the profit margins are minimal. We sell raw wool to middlemen who process it and sell it on. It barely covers costs." "Because you're selling raw materials instead of finished goods," Eliza said, her mind clicking through possibilities. "What if we cut out the middlemen? Process the wool ourselves, create finished textiles, sell directly to manufacturers in London? That would require equipment we don't have, expertise we don't have. Thomas knows wool processing. His father ran a textile mill before it closed." Eliza leaned forward, excitement building. "And I've been reading about the new manufacturing techniques. If we could set up even a small operation, produce quality fabric instead of raw wool—" "It would take months to establish," Victor interrupted. "We don't have months." "No, but we have 8 weeks to prove the concept, to show creditors we have a viable plan for generating revenue." Eliza grabbed his hand. "If we can demonstrate that the estate can increase production, become more profitable, they might extend the deadline. Give us time to actually implement the plan." Isabel was staring at her. "You want to turn this estate into a manufacturing operation?" "I want to save 30 families from losing their homes," Eliza corrected. "If that means learning textile production, then yes." Victor looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. "Eliza, this is insane. We have no experience, no infrastructure. We have people who need work. We have raw materials going to waste. We have 8 weeks to try." She squeezed his hand. "What's the alternative? Give up? Sell the land and doom those families? Better that than risk everything on a scheme that might not work." "Like my gardens?" Eliza challenged. "Everyone said they were a waste of resources, that I was delusional, but they're thriving now. They've brought life back to this estate, saved money on food costs, given people purpose." She stood, pulling him up with her. "You risked your life in that storm for plants, Victor. Risk your pride now for people." He stared at her, conflict warring in his eyes. "What if it fails?" he asked quietly. "What if we try and lose everything anyway?" "Then we lose fighting," Eliza said. "Together, as partners." The word hung in the air between them. Isabel cleared her throat. "I hate to interrupt this moment, but if you're serious about this plan, you need to move fast. The creditors won't wait." Victor looked from his wife to his sister, then down at their joined hands. "All right," he said finally, "we try, but we do it smart. Research the market, talk to Thomas, develop an actual plan before we commit resources." Eliza felt a surge of triumph. "When do we start?" "Now." Victor's mouth curved into something almost resembling a smile. "If we're going to save this estate, we'd better not waste time." They started that very afternoon. Thomas was brought in, nervous about being summoned to the Duke's study, shocked when Victor asked for his expertise on wool processing. "My father ran a mill, yes, Your Grace," he said cautiously, "but it closed 15 years ago. I don't know if my knowledge is still relevant." "It's more relevant than ours," Eliza said warmly. "Tell us everything. How the process works, what equipment is needed, what the market looks like." Over the next hour, Thomas laid out the basics. Wool processing required several stages: cleaning, carding, spinning, weaving. Each stage needed specific equipment and skilled workers. The initial investment would be significant, but the profit potential was real if they could produce quality fabric. "The key is finding a niche," Thomas explained, warming to his subject. "The big mills in the north produce cheap fabric in volume. We can't compete with that. But specialty fabrics, fine wools, unique weaves, luxury goods, those command premium prices." What kind of specialty fabrics? Victor asked, taking notes. Soft weave, for one. It's a technique my father developed. Creates fabric that's warm but lightweight, perfect for ladies' shawls and gentlemen's waistcoats. The secret is in the carding process. If we could replicate that. Could you? Eliza interrupted. Thomas hesitated. Maybe. I'd need to build the right equipment, test different approaches. It might take time. We have 8 weeks, Victor said. Is that enough to create samples? Something we could show to potential buyers? Samples, yes. Full production, no. Samples are enough, Eliza decided. If we can prove the quality, prove there's market demand, we can leverage that into extensions from the creditors. Victor looked at her with something like admiration. You've thought this through. I've had practice saving failing estates, she said dryly. My father's taught me what not to do. Now I'm learning what might actually work. Over the following days, they threw themselves into the project with singular focus. Victor reached out to business contacts in London, quietly inquiring about market demand for specialty textiles. The responses were promising. Several manufacturers expressed interest in locally produced soft weave, especially if the quality matched Thomas's descriptions. Eliza worked with Thomas on the practical side, converting an unused barn into a processing space. They brought in equipment piece by piece, some purchased, some improvised from materials already on the estate. And slowly, cautiously, they began hiring workers. This was where Eliza's earlier work paid unexpected dividends. The villagers who'd attended the Christmas gathering, who'd seen the Duchess working in the gardens without heirs, trusted her. When she explained the project, asked for workers willing to learn a new trade, people stepped forward. My daughter needs work, one farmer said. If your Grace is teaching textile skills, she'd be grateful for the opportunity. I've got a steady hand for fine work, a blacksmith's wife offered. Could I learn the carding? Within a week, they had a small workforce assembled, mostly women, eager for employment that didn't require leaving their families to work in distant factories. The village began to buzz with a new energy. But not everyone was supportive. The local gentry, scandalized by the Duke's descent into trade, made their displeasure known. Letters arrived condemning the project as beneath the Blackthorn dignity. Social invitations dried up. At church on Sunday, several prominent families pointedly ignored Eliza and Victor. Lord Ashford, Isabel's former suitor, was particularly vocal in his criticism. Manufacturing, he said loudly enough for half the congregation to hear. What next? Will the Duke start selling vegetables from a cart? Isabel's face went red, but before she could respond, Victor spoke up. If selling vegetables would save 30 families from losing their homes, I'd happily push the cart myself. The silence that followed was profound. Lord Ashford sputtered. But, Your Grace, your reputation? My reputation means nothing if my tenants are starving, Victor said calmly. I suggest you examine your own priorities before criticizing mine. He offered Eliza his arm and walked out, leaving scandal in his wake. In the carriage ride home, Isabel started laughing. Did you see Ashford's face? I thought he might actually faint. Even Victor smiled. I may have been too harsh. You were perfect, Eliza said, squeezing his hand, standing up for what matters instead of what looks proper. I'm learning from the best, he said, and kissed her knuckles. Isabel made a gagging sound. If you two are going to be romantic, warn me first so I can leave. But she was grinning. The work intensified as February arrived. Thomas made breakthrough after breakthrough, slowly recreating his father's soft weave technique. The first samples were rough, but by mid-February they produced fabric that made Eliza gasp. It was beautiful, soft as silk, but warm as wool, with a subtle sheen that caught the light. Exactly the kind of luxury item that would command premium prices. This is it, she breathed, running her fingers over the material. This is what will save us. Victor examined the fabric with a critical eye, then looked at Thomas with new respect. This is remarkable. Better than anything I've seen in London shops. Thomas flushed with pride. If we can maintain this quality in larger batches, we will, Victor said firmly. Whatever you need, you'll have it. They sent samples to London manufacturers along with carefully worded proposals outlining production capacity and pricing. The responses started trickling in within days. Interest, real, genuine interest. One manufacturer placed a small order immediately, enough to prove the concept, not enough to solve their financial crisis, but a start. "We're doing it," Eliza said, reading the order confirmation with shaking hands. "We're actually doing it." Victor pulled her into his arms, right there in the barn-turned-workshop, not caring who saw. "You're doing it," he corrected. "This was your idea, your vision." "Our vision," Eliza insisted. "We're partners, remember?" "Partners," he agreed and kissed her properly. The workers nearby politely pretended not to notice, though several were grinning, but they were running out of time. By the end of February, they'd secured 3 small orders and expressions of interest from 5 more manufacturers. It was progress, but not enough to satisfy the creditors demanding full payment in 3 weeks. Victor called a meeting with the solicitor and the primary creditor, a cold-eyed banker named Mr. Thornberry. "You're asking for an extension based on hypothetical future profits?" Thornberry said skeptically, examining their proposals. "That's not how business works, Your Grace." "I'm asking for an extension based on demonstrated market interest and production capability," Victor corrected. "We have orders in hand, manufacturers committed to purchasing our product, and a workforce ready to scale production. Small orders for manufacturers testing your quality. That's not a business model, it's a gamble." "All business is gambling," Eliza interjected, earning a sharp look from Thornberry. "The question is whether the odds are favorable. And in this case, they are." "Your Grace," Thornberry said, his tone patronizing, "perhaps you should leave financial discussions to those with experience." "My wife has more practical business sense than half the men I know," Victor interrupted coldly. "And she's right. This is a calculated risk, not blind gambling. We're asking for 6 months. Time to fulfill the existing orders and secure more. If we fail to meet production targets in that time, you can claim the land. But if we succeed, you get paid in full with interest." Thornberry studied them both, clearly trying to find the weakness in their plan. "Why should I believe this will work?" he finally asked. "The estate has been profitable but conservative for years. Suddenly you're venturing into manufacturing? It's erratic." "It's adaptive," Eliza said. "The old model, selling raw materials for minimal profit, was sustainable but stagnant. This model creates real value, provides employment, builds something lasting." "It's also your wife's idea, isn't it?" Thornberry's smile was unpleasant. "And we all know why you married her, to clear her father's gambling debts. Now she's convinced you to gamble the estate's future on a textile scheme. Rather poetic." Victor's face went dangerously cold. "Mr. Thornberry." But Eliza placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "You're right," she said calmly. "My father gambled and lost everything. I watched it destroy my family, which is exactly why I know the difference between reckless gambling and strategic risk." She leaned forward, holding Thornberry's gaze. "My father bet on luck. We're betting on labor, market research, and quality products. My father hid his debts. We're presenting transparent plans and realistic projections. My father gave up. We're fighting for 30 families who depend on this estate." She pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. "These are testimonials from the manufacturers we're working with. They're not hoping we succeed. They need us to succeed because our product is superior to anything else available at this price point. We're not asking you to gamble on us. We're offering you a guaranteed return if you're patient enough to see it through." Thornberry read the testimonials, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched until Victor thought his nerves would snap. Finally, Thornberry set down the papers. 3 months, not 6. You have until the end of May to deliver results. If production meets the targets outlined here, I'll extend the full debt period. If not, the land goes to auction." 3 months is, Victor started. "Acceptable," Eliza interrupted, extending her hand to Thornberry. "You have a deal." The banker shook her hand with obvious reluctance. "I hope you know what you're doing, Your Grace." "So do I," Eliza said honestly. After Thornberry left, Victor turned on her. 3 months isn't enough time. It's what we have, Eliza said firmly. So we make it enough. You're betting everything on this? We're betting everything on us. She cupped his face, making him look at her. We've already done the impossible, Victor. We've taken a dying estate and brought it back to life. We've created a business from nothing in less than 2 months. We've survived storms and rumors and your father's hidden disasters. 3 more months, we can do this. He searched her face, looking for doubt, finding only fierce determination. How are you so certain? Because I refuse to fail, she said simply. Because 30 families are counting on us. Because we fought too hard to give up now. She kissed him softly. And because I believe in you. In us. Victor pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you. Probably not. Good thing you're stuck with me anyway. He laughed, the sound still rough and unused, but genuine. They had 3 months to save everything. The challenge felt impossible, but then so had everything else they'd accomplished. March roared in like a lion, and so did they. Production ramped up with desperate intensity. The barn workshop ran from dawn until well past dark. Thomas pushed the workers hard but fairly, teaching techniques passed down from his father. Eliza worked alongside them, learning every stage of the process, getting her hands dirty again despite society's scandalized whispers. And Victor transformed completely. The cold, distant duke who'd avoided his own wife now spent his evenings in the workshop, learning to card wool, asking questions, treating workers like valued colleagues instead of invisible servants. He traveled to London twice a week, meeting with manufacturers, negotiating contracts, building relationships. The man who'd once said love was a weakness had found something stronger, purpose shared with someone who believed in him. The orders grew. First a trickle, then a steady stream. Manufacturers who'd been skeptical placed larger orders after seeing the quality. Word spread among London's textile traders. Thornwick Softweave was exceptional, the Duke's new venture surprisingly reliable. By mid-March, they had enough confirmed orders to meet Thornberry's targets. By late March, they'd exceeded them. The day the final numbers came in, Victor found Eliza in the workshop, supervising the packing of a large shipment. We did it, he said quietly. She looked up, saw the paper in his hand, and felt her heart skip. The final tally? 140% of target production, orders already booked through July. He moved closer, wonderment in his voice. Eliza, we didn't just save the estate. We've made it more profitable than it's been in a decade. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then she was in his arms, laughing and crying at once, and he was spinning her around the workshop while workers cheered. We did it, she gasped against his chest. We actually did it. You did it, Victor corrected, setting her down but not letting go. You saw what no one else did. Believed when everyone said it was impossible. Fought for people you barely knew because it was right. We did it together, Eliza insisted. You could have stopped me at any point, could have sold the land, taken the easy path, but you chose to fight. Because you taught me how. He kissed her, deep and thorough, not caring that half the workshop was watching. You taught me that freezing isn't surviving, that caring isn't weakness, that sometimes the bravest thing is letting yourself hope. Victor, I love you, he said, the words rough but real. I think I've loved you since you stood in that greenhouse covered in mud and refused to fade quietly away. I just didn't know how to say it. Eliza felt tears spill over. You're saying it now. I love you, he repeated, louder this time, and I'm done hiding it. The workers erupted in applause. Eliza laughed through her tears, pulling him down for another kiss. I love you too, even when you're impossible and cold and stubborn. Especially then? Especially then. They stood in the workshop they'd built together, surrounded by evidence of the impossible made real, and for the first time since that terrible wedding day, Eliza felt truly warm. The meeting with Thornberry the following week was almost anticlimactic. The banker reviewed the production numbers, the confirmed orders, the profit projections. His expression remained neutral, but Eliza saw the moment he realized they'd won. This is unexpected, he finally said. We told you it would work, Eliza said mildly. You told me a lot of things. I didn't believe most of them. Thornberry set down the papers. I'm canceling the debt collection. The estate is solvent, the operation is profitable, and frankly, my firm would rather maintain a positive relationship with a rising venture than force a sale. Victor's hand found Eliza's under the table, squeezing tight. Thank you, he said formally. Don't thank me. Thank your wife. Thornberry actually smiled, small but genuine. She's got more business sense than half the men in Parliament. You're lucky to have her." "I know," Victor said, looking at Eliza with undisguised love. After Thornbury left, they sat in the study, the same study where Victor had once threatened to cut off Eliza's funds, where he'd been so cold and cruel. Now he pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "We saved it," he murmured. "Everything. The estate, the tenants, the future." "We built something new," Eliza corrected. "Better than what was." "Because of you. Because of us." They sat in comfortable silence, watching spring rain through the window, so different from the violent storm that had broken everything open. "What now?" Victor asked. Eliza smiled. "Now we rebuild the greenhouse, expand production, maybe start teaching the workers to read so they can take on more responsibility." She looked up at him. "Now we keep building, together." "Together," Victor agreed and kissed her. Outside, spring was transforming Thornwick. The gardens Eliza had fought for bloomed in riots of color. The workshop hummed with productive energy. The estate that had been dying under cold management now thrived under passionate partnership. Word spread through the county. The Duke and Duchess of Thornwick had done the impossible, turned disaster into triumph, proved that care and courage could overcome even the worst circumstances. The same society that had mocked them now watched with grudging respect. And in the village, among the workers and tenants whose lives had been saved, a new story took root. Not about a desperate girl who married for money, but about a woman who refused to break, who saw possibility in ruin, who taught a frozen man how to feel again, and about a duke who finally learned that the strongest foundation wasn't control or coldness, but love freely given and fiercely protected. The story wasn't over, but the darkest chapter had passed, and ahead lay something neither had dared hope for on that rain-soaked wedding day. A future built on partnership. A home built on warmth. A love that had been tested by every hardship and emerged not just intact, but unbreakable. The victory over Thornbury should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. Spring arrived at Thornwick like a promise kept, transforming the grounds into something almost magical. The gardens Eliza had fought for burst into bloom, roses climbing trellises, lavender lining pathways, the reconstructed greenhouse filled with exotic flowers that shouldn't survive English weather, but did anyway, thriving under her care. The textile workshop hummed with constant activity. Orders flooded in faster than they could fill them. Thomas had trained a dozen workers who were now training others, creating a skilled workforce that other estates envied. The Thornwick softweave had become legendary in London, lightweight, impossibly soft, available in colors other manufacturers couldn't replicate. They were succeeding beyond anyone's wildest expectations. But success brought its own complications. The first warning came on a bright April morning when Isabel burst into the breakfast room, her face flushed with anger. "Have you seen this?" She slammed a newspaper onto the table between Victor and Eliza. Victor picked it up, his expression darkening as he read. "What is it?" "Lord Ashford. He's filed a formal complaint with the House of Lords, claiming our manufacturing operation violates estate covenants and debases the aristocracy." Isabel's voice shook with fury. "He's trying to shut us down." Eliza felt her stomach drop. "Can he do that?" "He can try," Victor said grimly, scanning the article. "The complaint argues that commercial manufacturing on aristocratic land sets a dangerous precedent, that it undermines the social order, encourages other lords to engage in common trade, and ultimately weakens the entire peerage system." "That's ridiculous," Eliza said. "It's also strategic," Isabel added bitterly. "Ashford's family has money in traditional textile mills up north. Our operation is stealing business from them. This isn't about social order, it's about protecting his profits." Victor set down the paper with careful control. "When is the hearing?" 2 weeks, before a council of peers." Isabel met her brother's eyes. "If they rule against us, we'll have to cease all manufacturing operations. Everything we've built, gone." The silence that followed was suffocating. Eliza looked at Victor and saw the old ice trying to reform, the instinct to retreat, to protect himself from caring too much about something that could be taken away. She reached across the table and took his hand. "We fight," she said simply. "Eliza, if the lords rule against us, then we make sure they don't." She squeezed his fingers. We've overcome everything else. We'll overcome this too. This isn't a storm we can just work through. This is politics, social pressure, centuries of tradition. Exactly, Eliza interrupted. And traditions change, society changes. We've already proven that. She stood, pulling him up with her. We just have to prove it to them. Victor looked at her with a mixture of love and exasperation. How? By showing them the truth, not with arguments or legal technicalities, but with evidence they can't ignore. Eliza's mind raced, forming a plan. Isabel, can you get us a meeting with some of the more progressive lords before the hearing? Maybe. Lord Hastings has been sympathetic to reform movements, and Lady Eleanor sits on several charitable boards. She might listen. Good. Arrange meetings with anyone who'll see us. Eliza turned to Victor. And we need to bring the workers to London. What? Not all of them, but representatives. People who can tell their stories, how this operation changed their lives, gave them skills and income they couldn't get elsewhere. Make it personal instead of theoretical. Victor stared at her. You want to parade workers before the House of Lords? I want to show the Lords what's actually at stake if they shut us down. Not aristocratic pride or business competition, but real families with real livelihoods. Eliza's voice gained intensity. Ashford is painting this as dangerous radicalism. We paint it as practical compassion, innovation that helps everyone, not just the wealthy. Isabel was grinning now. That's brilliant. Controversial, but brilliant. It's risky, Victor said, but Eliza could see him considering it. If we miscalculate, if the Lords see it as manipulation instead of honesty, then we lose, Eliza finished, but we lose fighting, together, just like everything else. He looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her close and kissed her forehead. You're going to get me thrown out of every club in London, he murmured. You hated those clubs anyway. True, he smiled against her hair. All right, we do it your way, but we do it smart. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. They traveled to London, rented a townhouse near Parliament, and began a careful campaign of meetings and persuasion. Eliza had never been comfortable in high society, but she'd learned from her battles at Thornwick how to listen, how to find common ground, how to turn potential enemies into allies. Lord Hastings received them in his study, an elderly man with sharp eyes and a reputation for supporting social reform. I've heard about your textile operation, he said, gesturing them to seats, causing quite a stir among the old guard. Because we're successful, or because we're different? Eliza asked. Hastings chuckled. Both. Ashford's trying to paint you as dangerous radicals undermining the social order. Is he right? We're teaching people valuable skills and creating quality products, Victor said carefully. If that's radical, then yes. What he means, Eliza added, is that we're doing what aristocrats should have been doing all along, using our resources and position to actually help the people who depend on our estates, instead of just collecting rents and maintaining distance. Spoken like someone who wasn't born to the aristocracy, Hastings observed. No, I wasn't. I married into it to save my family from ruin. Eliza met his gaze directly. Which means I understand what it's like when systems fail ordinary people, when those in power care more about tradition than survival. And now you're trying to change the system? We're trying to prove there's a better way, one where everyone benefits, not just the titled few. Hastings studied her thoughtfully. You know, the Lords won't take kindly to being lectured about their responsibilities by a duchess of less than a year. I'm not lecturing, I'm offering evidence. Eliza pulled out a folder of testimonials, letters from workers, production records, profit statements. These are real results, real people whose lives improved because we tried something different. If the Lords care at all about the future of this country, they'll see the value in that. And if they don't, then they'll prove they care more about their pride than their people, Eliza said simply. Hastings laughed outright. You're either very brave or very foolish. Both, Victor said dryly, but she's also right. Similar conversations played out over the next week. Some lords were sympathetic, others hostile, most cautiously neutral. But slowly, carefully, Eliza and Victor built a coalition of support among the more progressive peers. Lady Eleanor proved particularly valuable. a wealthy widow who ran charitable organizations throughout London, she immediately grasped the potential of their model. "If this works at Thornwick," she said during tea at her townhouse, "it could work elsewhere. Other estates could adopt similar programs. We could create a network of manufacturing operations that employ thousands, train skilled workers, produce quality goods." "That's the vision," Eliza confirmed. "But first we have to survive Ashford's attack." "Ashford is a fool blinded by greed," Lady Eleanor said dismissively. "But he has allies among the traditionalists. You'll need more than sympathy to win this hearing. You'll need spectacle." "Spectacle?" "Drama. Something memorable." Lady Eleanor leaned forward, eyes bright. "Bring your workers to the hearing. Let them speak. Show the Lords real faces, real stories. Make it impossible to vote against you without feeling like villains." "That's exactly what we're planning," Victor said. "Good. Then take it further." Lady Eleanor smiled. "I'll arrange for press coverage. Make sure every newspaper in London sends reporters. Turn this hearing into a public event. If the Lords try to shut you down, they'll do it in full view of the city." Eliza felt a flutter of nerves. "That's risky. If public opinion turns against us, it won't. Your story is compelling. Aristocrats using their position to help workers, creating opportunity instead of just extracting wealth. The public will love it." Lady Eleanor's smile turned sharp. "An Ashford story is greed masquerading as tradition. The public will hate that." "You're turning this into theater," Victor observed. "Politics is always theater, Your Grace. The question is whether you want to be actors or audience." They chose to be actors. The night before the hearing, Eliza couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of their London townhouse, watching the city lights, feeling the weight of everything riding on tomorrow. If they lost, the workshop would close. The workers would lose their livelihoods. Everything they'd built would collapse. Victor found her there near midnight, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Too busy rehearsing arguments in my head." He pulled her back against his chest, resting his chin on her head. "Are we doing the right thing? Bringing workers to testify, or fighting it all?" "Both." Eliza turned in his arms, studying his face. "Do you regret it? Taking this path instead of just selling the land, maintaining the status quo?" "Every day," he admitted, "and also not at all." He cupped her face gently. "Before you, I existed, managed things, followed the rules. But I wasn't alive, wasn't building anything that mattered. Now," he gestured at the city beyond the window, "now we're trying to change how the entire system works. It's terrifying. But worth it? If we win, absolutely. If we lose," he paused. "Even if we lose, at least we tried. At least we fought for something real instead of just protecting privilege." "That's very romantic," Eliza said, "but I'd really prefer to win." Victor laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Then we'd better get some sleep. Tomorrow we make history or become cautionary tales." "Why not both? You're impossible. You love me anyway." "I really do," he said, and kissed her. The hearing was held in a grand chamber in the House of Lords, all dark wood and solemn tradition. Lords filled the benches, dressed in formal robes, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. Ashford sat in the front row, looking smugly confident. The press gallery was packed. Lady Eleanor had delivered on her promise. Victor and Eliza sat at a table facing the assembly, with Thomas and 3 workers behind them. Sarah, a young mother who'd learned carding, old Peter, a farmer who'd transitioned to spinning, and Margaret, a widow who now supervised the dyeing process. The presiding lord, a severe man named Pemberton, called the session to order. "We're here to address Lord Ashford's complaint regarding commercial manufacturing operations on the Thornwick estate," he announced. "Lord Ashford, present your case." Ashford stood, his expression grave. "My lords, I bring this complaint not out of personal animosity, but out of concern for the very foundation of our social order. The Duke of Thornwick has established a commercial textile operation on aristocratic land, employing common workers in industrial production. This sets a dangerous precedent." He went on, painting a picture of social collapse, aristocrats abandoning their roles as land stewards to become merchants, the blurring of class boundaries, the erosion of traditions that had maintained order for centuries. "If we allow this, Ashford concluded. We open the door to chaos. Every lord will become a tradesman, every estate a factory. The aristocracy will lose its meaning, its purpose. We must stop this before it spreads. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Then it was Victor's turn. He stood slowly, commanding the room with his presence. My lords, I appreciate Lord Ashford's concern for tradition, but I would remind this chamber that tradition without adaptation is simply stagnation, and stagnation leads to death. He laid out the facts, the financial crisis that had threatened the estate, the innovative solution they'd developed, the measurable success they'd achieved. Production numbers, profit margins, employment statistics, all presented with calm precision. This isn't about abandoning our role as land stewards, Victor continued. It's about expanding that role. We're not just managing land anymore. We're creating opportunity, building a sustainable model that benefits everyone, from the workers who earn fair wages to the manufacturers who get quality products to the estate itself, which is more financially stable than it's been in decades. But at what cost to dignity? Another lord interrupted. You're working alongside common laborers. Your wife, he gestured at Eliza, is photographed with dirt under her fingernails. How is this appropriate for your station? My wife, Victor said coldly, has more dignity in her smallest finger than some peers have in their entire being. She worked alongside laborers because the work needed doing, and she wasn't too proud to do it. That's not undignified, that's admirable. More murmurs, these less certain. Pemberton raised a hand for silence. Your Grace, while your passion is noted, the question remains. Does commercial manufacturing belong on aristocratic estates? Can you provide evidence that this benefits anyone beyond your immediate financial interests? Victor looked back at Eliza. She nodded. I can do better than provide evidence, Victor said. I can provide witnesses. Real people whose lives have been changed by this operation. People who can speak to whether this is dangerous radicalism or practical compassion. He gestured to the workers. My lords, I present Sarah Winters, Peter Graves, and Margaret Ashton. People who work at Thornwick. People whose voices are rarely heard in chambers like this, but whose lives are most affected by the decisions you make. Pemberton looked uncertain. This is highly irregular. Truth is often irregular, Eliza said, standing beside her husband, but it's still truth. A pause. Then Pemberton nodded. Very well, but keep it brief. Sarah stood first, visibly nervous but determined. My lords, I'm a widow with 3 children. Before Thornwick, I took in washing for pennies, barely enough to feed my family. Now I work in the textile workshop. I've learned a real skill, carding, which is precise work that requires training. I earn fair wages. My children eat proper meals. And I have hope for the future. She sat down, hands shaking. Peter stood next. I'm 62. Too old for farm work, too poor to retire. I thought I'd die in poverty. Then the Duke and Duchess offered training in spinning, gave me work that suits my abilities, treated me with respect instead of pity. I'm not a charity case anymore. I'm a skilled craftsman. Margaret was last. My husband died in a mill accident up north, left me with nothing. I came to Thornwick desperate. The Duchess, her voice caught. She didn't just give me work. She taught me leadership. I supervise the dyeing process now, train other women, make decisions, have responsibility. I'm not invisible anymore. The chamber had gone very quiet. Ashford stood abruptly. This is emotional manipulation. These people are reading scripts prepared by... No one prepared our words, Sarah interrupted, surprising everyone. We're just telling our truth. And our truth is that the Duke and Duchess gave us chances when no one else would. Taught us skills instead of just throwing money at poverty. Treated us like we matter. You're workers, Ashford said dismissively. Of course you support your employers. We're people, Margaret corrected, her voice sharp. And we're asking you to see us as people, not just statistics in your argument about tradition. The reporters in the gallery were scribbling furiously. Lord Hastings stood. Lord Pemberton, if I may, I've reviewed the Thornwick operation personally, visited the workshop, examined the finances, interviewed workers. What I found was not radicalism, but innovation, a model that could be replicated across England, creating skilled employment and quality production while maintaining estate viability. You're advocating for widespread adoption of commercial manufacturing, another lord asked skeptically. I'm advocating for evolution, Hastings replied. The world is changing, industry is growing. We can either resist change until we're irrelevant, or we can adapt and lead that change. Thornwick has shown us a way to do the latter while maintaining our responsibilities to the land and people who depend on us. Lady Eleanor, watching from the gallery, had arranged for several prominent businessmen to attend. One stood now, addressing the chamber. If I may speak, I'm Robert Hayes, owner of Hayes Manufacturing. We've been purchasing Thornwick's soft weave for 2 months. The quality exceeds anything available from traditional mills, and the pricing is competitive. From a purely business perspective, this operation is brilliant. It's created a product the market wants using a workforce that's motivated and skilled. That's not dangerous. That's the future of British manufacturing. More lords stood to speak, the debate becoming heated. Some defended tradition, others argued for innovation. But the tide was clearly turning. Finally, Pemberton called for silence. This chamber will vote on Lord Ashford's complaint. Those in favor of prohibiting commercial manufacturing on aristocratic estates signify. Hands rose. Eliza counted them, her heart pounding. 23. Those opposed? More hands, 37. The complaint is denied, Pemberton announced. The Duke of Thornwick may continue his operations. The chamber erupted in noise, some lords applauding, others protesting, reporters racing for the doors to file their stories. Eliza grabbed Victor's hand, feeling tears sting her eyes. They'd won, not just the hearing, but something bigger, the right to continue, to build, to prove that their way worked. Ashford pushed through the crowd, his face red with fury. This isn't over. You've set a dangerous precedent. We've set an example, Victor corrected calmly. Others will follow. And eventually, your way of doing things, extracting wealth without creating value, maintaining traditions that benefit no one but the wealthy, will become obsolete. You think you've won? Ashford hissed. You've just made enemies of everyone who values order and stability. Then we're in good company, Eliza said, stepping forward, because the people who value order over justice are usually on the wrong side of history. Ashford stormed off. Lady Eleanor appeared, beaming. Brilliant performance. The papers will be full of this tomorrow. You're heroes. We're just people trying to do the right thing, Eliza said. Exactly. That's what makes it compelling. Lady Eleanor squeezed her hand. You've changed more than just your estate today. You've changed the conversation about what's possible. Outside, workers and supporters had gathered, word of the verdict spreading fast. They cheered when Victor and Eliza emerged. Sarah pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Thank you for fighting for us. Eliza hugged her. We fought together. That's why we won. The celebration lasted well into the evening, but eventually Victor and Eliza found themselves alone in their townhouse, exhausted and exhilarated. We did it, Eliza breathed, collapsing onto a sofa. We actually changed things. Victor sat beside her, pulling her close. You changed things. I just followed your lead. That's not true. It is. He turned her face to his. A year ago, I would have sold the land without a second thought, avoided risk, maintained control, stayed frozen. You taught me that some things are worth risking everything for, that caring deeply is strength, not weakness, that the best way to honor the past is to build a better future. Pretty speech, Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. I've had a good teacher. He kissed her softly. I love you. And I'm so grateful you refused to let me stay cold. I love you too. Even when you're stubborn and impossible and... He kissed her again, deeper this time, cutting off her words. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Eliza smiled. So what now? We've saved the estate, won the hearing, changed the world. What's left? Victor's hand moved to her stomach, resting there with gentle reverence. Now we build a family, he said quietly. Fill Thornwick with warmth and laughter. Raise children who know that caring is strength and that fighting for what's right matters more than maintaining appearances. Eliza covered his hand with hers, hope blooming in her chest. You want children? I want everything. With you. A real marriage, a real partnership, a real future. His voice dropped to a whisper. I want to be the father mine never was. I want our children to grow up warm instead of frozen. They will, Eliza promised. We'll make sure of it. They returned to Thornwick 3 days later, welcomed as conquering heroes. The village turned out to greet them, cheering and throwing flowers. The workers from the textile workshop had made a banner that read, "Welcome home, your graces. We're proud of you." Even the servants who'd been hostile months ago now smiled genuine smiles. Mrs. Davies met them at the door with tears in her eyes. The whole county's talking about what you did in London, standing up for workers, proving the old ways wrong. You've made us all proud. Isabel appeared, grinning. I told you that you'd make enemies of every stuffed shirt in England. I was right. You were also right that it would be worth it, Eliza said, hugging her sister-in-law. Of course I was. I'm always right. Isabel's smile softened. Seriously, though, what you two did was extraordinary. You didn't just save Thornwick. You proved that caring about people matters more than maintaining dignity. Over the following months, the transformation of Thornwick completed itself. The textile operation expanded, occupying a new building specifically designed for manufacturing. More workers were hired and trained. Orders poured in from across England and eventually from the continent. The Thornwick model became a case study in innovative estate management, studied and replicated by progressive lords throughout the country. The gardens flourished into something spectacular. The greenhouse restored and expanded, filled with exotic specimens that drew botanists from universities. The kitchen gardens produced enough to feed the entire household and donate surplus to the village. The house itself warmed. Portraits of Lady Catherine were moved from storage to prominent positions. Music filled the halls. Laughter echoed in rooms that had been silent for 17 years. And one crisp October morning, Victor woke to find Eliza watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? He asked, pulling her closer. I'm pregnant, she said simply. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Then he was kissing her, laughing, crying, holding her like she might disappear. Are you sure? He asked when he could form words. The doctor confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be certain before I told you. Her hand moved to her still flat stomach. We're having a baby. Victor's hand covered hers, wonder in his eyes. A baby. Our baby. Our baby, Eliza confirmed, due in late spring. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. I'm terrified. So am I. What if I'm a terrible father? What if I can't? You won't be terrible. You'll be wonderful. I pulled back to look at him. You've already learned the hardest part, how to love, how to be vulnerable, how to fight for what matters. Everything else we'll figure out together. Together, he repeated, and kissed her. The pregnancy announcement spread through Thornwick like wildfire, met with genuine celebration. The workers made baby clothes in Thornwick soft weave, impossibly soft blankets and tiny garments in beautiful colors. Mrs. Davies began planning elaborate meals to keep the Duchess properly nourished. Thomas started building a cradle from wood salvaged from the old greenhouse, wanting the Duke's child to have something that connected them to the transformation of the estate. Even Isabel softened, declaring herself thrilled to become an aunt and immediately beginning to spoil the unborn child with expensive gifts. The months passed in a blur of happiness and preparation. Victor became almost comically overprotective, hovering constantly, insisting Eliza rest more than she wanted. I'm pregnant, not fragile, she protested when he tried to stop her from visiting the workshop. I can still walk. You can walk to the library or the sitting room, not to a building full of machinery and potential hazards. Victor, please. His hand found her stomach, now visibly rounded. Let me protect you. Both of you. I know it's irrational, but I can't risk. She understood. His mother had died when he was helpless to save her. He couldn't bear the thought of history repeating. All right, she said gently. I'll be careful. But you have to promise not to lock me in my room like a porcelain doll. Only if you promise to tell me immediately if anything feels wrong. Deal. Spring arrived with a rush of green and gold, and with it came their daughter. The labor was long and difficult, leaving Victor pacing the hallway outside their chambers like a caged animal. Isabel sat with him, trying to distract him from his fear. "She's strong," Isabel reminded him for the 100th time. "She survived you being awful to her, survived a scandal-plagued marriage, survived building a business from nothing. She'll survive this too." "What if—" "Don't." Isabel gripped his hand. "Don't borrow trouble. Just have faith." Finally, after hours that felt like years, the doctor emerged. "Your Grace, you have a healthy daughter, and your wife is well." Victor nearly collapsed with relief. He burst into the room to find Eliza propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blue fabric. "Victor," she said, her voice hoarse but happy. "Meet our daughter." He moved to the bed like a man in a dream, looking down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. She was perfect. Dark hair like his, delicate features, impossibly small hands. "Can I hold her?" he whispered. Eliza carefully transferred the baby to his arms, showing him how to support her head. Victor held his daughter with infinite care, staring down at her with wonder. "She's so small," he breathed. "She'll grow." "She's perfect." "She is." Eliza watched them, tears sliding down her cheeks. "What should we name her?" Victor looked up, his own eyes wet. "Catherine, after my mother." "If that's all right with you." "It's perfect," Eliza said. They named her Catherine Elizabeth Blackthorne, and from her first breath she transformed everything. Victor, who'd been frozen for 17 years, melted completely in the face of his daughter's existence. He held her for hours, talking to her in soft tones, marveling at every tiny sound and movement. "I can't believe she's ours," he said one night, watching Catherine sleep in her cradle. "Believe it," Eliza said, leaning against him. "We made her. Out of love and stubbornness and refusing to accept that cold was enough." "She'll never know cold," Victor promised. "I'll make sure this house stays warm for her, that she grows up knowing she's loved, valued, free to be whoever she wants to be." "Even if she wants to run a textile empire, but," Eliza teased, "especially then." He turned to her, his expression serious. "Thank you. For refusing to give up on me, for teaching me that caring is strength, for giving me this—" He gestured at Catherine, sleeping peacefully. "This family I never thought I deserved." "You deserve it," Eliza said firmly. "You deserve warmth and love and happiness, and so do I. And so does she." She kissed him softly. "We built this together, Victor. Everything, the business, the estate, our marriage, our daughter. We built it from nothing but determination and love." "From arrangement to empire," Victor murmured. "What?" "That's what we did. Started with a cold arrangement, a contract marriage, two people who didn't want each other. And we built an empire. Not just the business, but this." He gestured at the nursery, the house beyond, the life they'd created. "This warmth, this family, this future." Eliza smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "From arrangement to empire. I like that." They stood together in the quiet nursery, watching their daughter sleep, and outside the window, Thornwick bloomed in the spring night. The estate that had been dying under cold management now thrived under passionate partnership. The workers who'd been desperate for employment now had skills and hope. The marriage that began as a transaction had become a love story that people told their children, about a woman who refused to break and a man who learned to thaw, and how together they changed everything. Years later, when Catherine was old enough to understand, Eliza would tell her the story. About a rain-soaked wedding where no one smiled. About gardens saved from death and a greenhouse rebuilt from ruins. About a storm that broke everything open and revealed what lay beneath the ice. About a hearing where workers' voices changed the minds of lords. About how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to fade quietly away, even when the whole world expects you to disappear. "Did you know you'd win?" Catherine asked, eyes wide. "When you started fighting?" "No," Eliza admitted honestly, "but I knew I had to try. Because some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible." "Like Papa?" "Especially like Papa." Eliza smiled, looking across the room to where Victor sat reading, their second child, a son named Thomas, sleeping against his chest. He was worth every battle, every risk, every moment of doubt. Victor looked up, catching her gaze, and smiled. The same smile that had been so rare in those early days now came easily, frequently, warming everything it touched. "Tell me the ending again," Catherine demanded. "The ending is this," Eliza said, pulling her daughter close. "We won, not just the hearing or the business, but everything. We won the right to love each other, to build a life that mattered, to prove that caring deeply is the strongest foundation of all. We won warmth in a house that had been frozen. We won hope in a place that had forgotten how to dream. And most importantly," she kissed Catherine's head, "we won you, and your brother. And this beautiful, chaotic, warm family we never expected but couldn't live without. So it's a happy ending." "It's a happy beginning," Eliza corrected, "because the best stories don't end. They just keep growing, building, becoming more than anyone imagined possible." And in the years that followed, that's exactly what happened. The Thornwick model spread across England, estate after estate adopting innovative manufacturing while maintaining their land stewardship. The woman who'd been dismissed as a desperate social climber became known as a visionary, consulted by lords and businessmen alike. The man who'd been frozen for 17 years became famous for his compassion, for treating workers like valued partners instead of expendable resources. Their children grew up in a house filled with warmth and laughter, learning that caring deeply was strength and that fighting for what's right mattered more than maintaining appearances. And on warm summer evenings, you could find them all in the gardens that had started everything, surrounded by blooming roses and the scent of lavender, building memories on the foundation of love that had survived every test. The Duke and Duchess of Thornwick, who'd begun as strangers forced into a cold arrangement, who'd become partners fighting impossible odds, who'd built an empire from determination and refused surrender, who'd learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from accepting what you're given, but from daring to imagine something better and fighting like hell to make it real. And who'd discovered, in the end, that the warmest fires are built not from easy kindling, but from the desperate need to survive the cold, and the courage to believe that spring will come again if you just refuse to stop fighting for it. That was their story. From arrangement to empire, from ice to fire, from survival to legacy. And it all began with a woman who refused to fade quietly away, and a man who learned that the strongest walls aren't built from ice, but from love freely given and fiercely protected. The rest was just details. Beautiful, chaotic, impossibly warm details that filled a house once cold with so much life that the very walls seemed to glow with it. And that, Catherine would tell her own children years later, was the real magic. Not that they succeeded, though they did. Not that they won, though they did that too. But that they transformed a prison into a home, a contract into love, and a dying estate into something that would flourish for generations. All because one woman looked at an impossible situation and said no. No to fading away. No to accepting less than she deserved. No to letting beautiful things die without a fight. And that single refusal changed everything.